Tonight, we explore the most unlikely alliance in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. The wolf and the lion. The man who ruled by honor and the man who ruled by fear. Ned Stark and Tywin Lannister, two lords who agreed on nothing, respected nothing about each other's methods, and would never, under any ordinary circumstance, have chosen to work together. But the circumstances were not ordinary. Jon Arryn was dead, murdered by someone inside the court, and the king on the Iron Throne looked at the chaos gathering around him and did the one thing nobody expected Robert Baratheon to do. He thought clearly. He summoned the two most powerful lords in Westeros and told them to fix it. Together, not because they wanted to, because Robert needed the wolf's honor to find the truth and the lion's teeth to handle whatever the truth turned out to be. What followed was the most effective and the most miserable political partnership the realm had ever seen. Two men who never stopped arguing, never stopped disagreeing, and never stopped making each other better. This is the story of what might have happened if Ned Stark and Tywin Lannister put aside everything they believed about each other and governed together. Not as friends. Never as friends. As something harder and more useful than friendship. As equals. King's Landing, The Summons, 298 AC. The Raven came to Winterfell on a cold morning, and Ned read it twice because the first reading did not make sense. Robert was summoning him south. That part was expected. Jon Arryn was dead, and the Hand's seat was empty, and Ned had been anticipating the call since the Raven carrying the death notice had arrived a week before. Robert needed a hand he could trust, and Ned was the last man alive whom Robert trusted completely. But the letter said something else. The letter said Robert was also summoning Tywin Lannister, not to serve as hand, not to replace Jon Arryn, to investigate, with Ned, the circumstances of Jon Arryn's death, which Robert, in a burst of the sharp intelligence that people who called him stupid tended to forget he possessed, had decided was not natural. "He wants me to work with Tywin Lannister," Ned said to Catelyn in their chambers, with the fire and the winter outside, and the letter in his hand like a document of surrender. Why? Because Robert thinks Jon Arryn was murdered, and he thinks the investigation needs a man who'll find the truth and a man who'll know what to do with it. Ned set the letter down. He thinks I'm the first and Tywin is the second. Catelyn looked at him. Her face had the Tully practicality that Ned had learned to read over 15 years of marriage, the expression that said she was processing the political implications before the emotional ones, the way Tully's processed everything. "He's not wrong," she said. "He's asking me to trust Tywin Lannister. He's asking you to work with Tywin Lannister. Those aren't the same thing." She sat on the bed. "You don't have to trust the lion to hunt with it. You just have to know where its teeth are. Its teeth are everywhere. That's the problem with Tywin. And your honor is everywhere. That's the problem with you." She held his gaze. "Go south. Work with the lion. Find out who killed Jon Arryn. And come home." "That's the part I'm worried about," Ned said. "The coming home." He went south. The letter went to Casterly Rock on the same day, and Tywin Lannister read it once, because Tywin Lannister only needed to read things once. Robert wanted him in King's Landing. Robert wanted him to investigate Jon Arryn's death alongside Ned Stark. Robert believed the death was a murder and wanted two men, one for integrity and one for competence, which was Robert's way of saying he trusted Ned more and needed Tywin more. And the distinction was not lost on Tywin. Tywin sat in his study at Casterly Rock with the letter and the evening light coming through the windows that overlooked the sunset sea. And he did what Tywin always did when presented with a political development. He calculated. The calculation was this. Jon Arryn had been investigating something before he died. Tywin did not know what. His sources inside the Red Keep had been frustratingly vague on the subject, which meant the investigation had been conducted with unusual care, which meant the subject was dangerous enough to require care. Jon Arryn had been a careful man in general, but the care he had taken with this particular inquiry suggested that whatever he had found threatened someone powerful enough to kill a Hand of the King. There were very few people in the Seven Kingdoms powerful enough to kill a Hand and get away with it. Tywin was one of them. He had not done it, which meant someone else had. And the someone else was operating at a level that concerned Tywin, because a level that could kill a Hand could also threaten a Lannister. Additionally, and this was the part of the calculation that Tywin did not enjoy, Cersei was in King's Landing. Cersei was queen. Cersei was, of Tywin's children, the one who believed herself to be the most like her father, and who was, in fact, the least, because Cersei had inherited Tywin's ambition without his discipline, Tywin's contempt without his patience, and Tywin's certainty without his judgment. If Jon Arryn had been investigating something that threatened someone at court, and if Cersei was at court, then the investigation might have been investigating Cersei. Tywin did not know what Cersei had done. He suspected. The suspicion lived in the place where Tywin kept the things he had noticed, but not yet verified. The blonde children, the green eyes, the absence of any Baratheon feature in 3 true-born heirs. The suspicion was a door that Tywin had not opened because opening it would require confronting the possibility that his daughter had done something so catastrophically stupid that it endangered his entire legacy. Robert was offering him a reason to open the door. Not a comfortable reason. Working with Ned Stark was not comfortable. Ned Stark was the most rigid man in the Seven Kingdoms, and the rigidity was exhausting. But a reason. An authorized reason. The King's command, which gave Tywin political cover to investigate whatever needed investigating without appearing to do it for his own interest. He wrote his reply that evening. 2 words. I'll come. He packed the next morning. The first meeting. What happened when the wolf met the lion? They met in the Hand's chambers, which were empty now, and which smelled of the absence of Jon Arryn, the way a room smelled of a man who had been removed from it. The personal things gone, the political things remaining, the desk and the chairs and the records that a Hand accumulated over 15 years of governing. Robert was present for the first 10 minutes, which was Robert's way of saying, I'm the king. This is my decision. Sort it out. Jon was murdered, Robert said. He was standing, which meant he was agitated because Robert sat when he was comfortable and stood when he was not. Someone in this court killed my Hand, and I want to know who, and I want them dead, and I want the 2 of you to do it. Your Grace, Ned began. Don't Your Grace me. I didn't bring you 800 miles to be polite. I brought you because you're the most honest man I know and because, he gestured at Tywin, because he's the most dangerous man I know. And together, you're the thing that whoever killed Jon Arryn should be afraid of. Tywin stood at the window. He had not sat. He would not sit until the king left, because sitting in the king's presence without being invited was a presumption, and Tywin did not presume. He positioned. What evidence do you have that Lord Arryn was murdered? Tywin said. His maester says the illness was wrong. Too fast. Too clean. Healthy men don't go from standing to dead in 3 days without something in their wine or their food or their whatever. Robert waved a hand. I'm not a maester. I know what a killed man looks like, and Jon Arryn looked killed. A king's suspicion is not evidence, Tywin said. Then find the evidence. That's why you're here. Robert looked between them, the wolf and the lion, Ned in his northern greys, and Tywin in his Lannister crimson, the 2 most powerful lords in the 7 kingdoms, standing in a dead man's office. I'm giving you full authority. Investigate anyone. Question anyone. Open any door. But you do it together. Not separately. Together. I need Ned's honesty to make sure the truth doesn't get buried, and I need your... He waved at Tywin again. Your everything. Your gold. Your spies. Your ability to make people tell the truth by looking at them. I'm flattered, Tywin said. He wasn't flattered. You're useful, Robert said. There's a difference. Sort it out. He walked to the door. Stopped. And don't kill each other. I need you both alive. He left. The door closed. Ned and Tywin stood in the Hand's chambers and looked at each other for the first time without a king between them. And the looking was its own kind of conversation. Ned saw a tall, thin man with gold-green eyes and a mouth that had been designed for disapproval. Tywin Lannister was 62 years old and looked 50 because wealth and discipline preserved a man the way salt preserved meat, dried him out, and kept him functional long past the point where a softer man would have gone to pieces. He wore Lannister crimson without ostentation, which was its own kind of ostentation, because a man who could wear crimson plainly was a man who did not need the clothing to announce his power. Tywin saw a man of 40 who looked older because the North aged everyone, and because honor, like poverty, took a visible toll. Ned Stark was grey-eyed and grey-tempered, a man whose face said exactly what his mind was thinking, which Tywin found both admirable and appalling. Admirable because honesty was a rare quality, and appalling because displaying it was a weakness that any competent enemy could exploit. Lord Stark, Tywin said. Lord Lannister. We should establish the rules of this arrangement. All right. First, we share information. All of it. If you discover something that implicates my family, you tell me before you tell the king. If I discover something that implicates the North, I tell you. No secrets between us. The investigation requires trust, even if the trust is provisional. Agreed, Ned said, with a condition. Name it. If we find the truth, we act on it. All of it. Not the parts that are politically convenient. All of it. I won't help you bury half the answer, because the other half threatens your family. Tywin held the silence. The green-gold eyes assessed Ned with the patience of a man who had been assessing threats for 40 years and who was very good at distinguishing between a threat and a nuisance. Agreed, Tywin said, with a condition of my own. Name it. If the truth requires action that is difficult, politically, personally, you don't insist on the most honourable course simply because it's the most honourable. You consider the most effective course. Honour and effectiveness are not always the same thing, Lord Stark, and a man who confuses them is a man who gets people killed. Ned looked at the Lord of Casterly Rock. I won't confuse them, Ned said, but I won't abandon the distinction either. Tywin's mouth thinned. It was not a smile. Tywin Lannister did not smile. It was the acknowledgement that the conversation had produced the only outcome it was ever going to produce, a grudging, conditional, deeply uncomfortable agreement between two men who would rather have been anywhere else. Then we begin, Tywin said. Then we begin, Ned said. They sat. It was the first time they had ever sat at the same table. It would not be the last. The investigation, what the books showed. They started with Jon Arryn's records. Tywin had commandeered the Hand Study as their base of operations, which was a political statement that Ned recognized and chose not to fight. The study was the seat of power, and Tywin sitting in it announced to the court that the investigation was serious. Ned would have preferred to work from humbler quarters. Tywin would have preferred to work without Ned. Neither got what he preferred. The records were extensive. Jon Arryn had been Hand for 15 years, and his files contained the accumulated governance of a kingdom, tax receipts, correspondence, judicial records, diplomatic notes, the 1,000 small transactions that kept the realm from collapsing. The files also contained, buried in the routine material, a pattern that became visible only when you were looking for it. Jon Arryn had been investigating something. The evidence was in the margins. Books requested from the Grand Maester's library, notes on bloodlines, visits to tradesmen in the city that had nothing to do with the Hand's official business. The investigation had been careful, methodical, and incomplete, stopped by death before it reached its conclusion. "The lineage book," Ned said, pulling it from a shelf where it had been replaced but not in its original position. The spine was misaligned, the kind of detail that Ned noticed because Ned noticed everything that was out of place. He was looking at bloodlines. "Baratheon bloodlines," Tywin said. He was at the desk reading Arryn's personal correspondence with the cold efficiency of a man who processed text the way a counting house processed coin. "There are notes here. References to the Baratheon line's consistency. Dark hair, blue eyes, dominant in every recorded union." Why would Jon care about Baratheon blood? Tywin did not answer. His face, which revealed nothing when Tywin did not want it to reveal anything, remained perfectly still. But Ned saw the stillness and recognized it for what it was. The stillness of a man who had just confirmed a suspicion he had been hoping was wrong. "Lord Lannister." "I heard you." Why would Jon Arryn care about Baratheon blood? Tywin set down the letter he was reading. "Because Robert's true-born children are blonde," Tywin said. "And no Baratheon in 300 years of recorded history has produced a blonde child." The room, the desk, the files. The dead hand's records, arranged in careful piles, the evidence of an investigation that someone had killed to stop. "You knew," Ned said. "I suspected." Tywin's voice was controlled. The control was a choice. Tywin was choosing to be controlled because the alternative was an emotion he would not display in front of Ned Stark or anyone else. "I have suspected for some time that my daughter's children are not Robert's. I have not confirmed it, because confirming it would require acting on it, and acting on it would destroy your family's position, would require me to choose between my daughter and my legacy." Tywin's green-gold eyes met Ned's grey. "A choice I have been avoiding. A choice that Jon Arryn's investigation has now made unavoidable." Ned sat with this. He had come south expecting to investigate a murder. He was sitting in a dead man's study with the father of the Queen, who had just admitted, in the measured, controlled, careful way that Tywin admitted things, that the Queen's children were bastards, and the succession of the 7 kingdoms was built on a lie. "If the children aren't Robert's," Ned said, "then the succession falls to Stannis. Yes, I can count Lord Stark. And the man who benefits most from a false succession is whoever controls the Queen. Yes." Tywin held the silence. "My daughter is not intelligent enough to have managed this alone. She is bold enough to have done the thing but not disciplined enough to have hidden it for 15 years. Someone has been helping her. Or using her. Using her how? That is what we need to find out before we can address the succession crisis. And it is a crisis, Lord Stark, the largest the realm has faced since the Targaryens fell. We need to understand who manufactured it and why." Ned looked at Tywin Lannister. The man's face was granite, not emotionless. Tywin was not emotionless, Ned was learning, the way you learned a landscape's features by walking through it. Tywin was controlled. The emotion was there, the fury at his daughter's stupidity, the fear for his legacy, the calculation about what the truth would cost. But the emotion was behind the wall, pressurized, contained, directed. "We need to tell Robert," Ned said. "Not yet. He's the king. His wife has—" "I know what his wife has done," Tywin said, and there was frost in it. "I know better than you, Lord Stark, because she is my daughter, and the shame of it is mine before it is anyone else's. But telling Robert now, before we understand the full picture, produces chaos. Robert is not a man who responds to personal betrayal with strategic thinking. Robert responds with his hammer. If we tell him his wife's children are not his, he has a right to know. He has a right to know the truth, the full truth. Not half of it, delivered in a way that produces a war before we've identified the enemy. Tywin leaned forward. Lord Stark, I am going to say something that you will not want to hear, but I need you to hear it. Say it. Honor is a tool, like a sword, like gold, like an army. It is a thing you use when using it serves the purpose, and you put aside when using it does not. Telling Robert now, before we know who is behind this, before we know who killed Jon Arryn, who has been helping Cersei, who benefits from the chaos that the truth will produce, telling Robert now is using the honor tool at the wrong moment. It is the sword swing that misses the enemy and hits the ally. And when do you suggest we use it? When we know everything? When we can tell Robert the truth and also tell him what to do about it? When the truth comes with a plan, not just a wound? Ned was quiet. He hated this. He hated the logic of it because the logic was sound, and because sound logic that delayed justice was the thing Ned feared most about the South. The way pragmatism could dress itself up as wisdom and make a man feel reasonable for doing the wrong thing. But Tywin wasn't wrong. Telling Robert now, with half the picture, would produce exactly what Tywin described. Rage. Robert's rage wasn't strategic. Robert's rage was a force of nature that destroyed whatever was in front of it without regard for what was behind it, and the things behind it, the succession, the stability of the realm, the lives of Cersei's children who were, whatever else they were, children. Those things would be destroyed alongside the guilty. 1 week, Ned said. We investigate for 1 week. We find out who killed Jon Arryn, who has been manipulating the succession, and what the full picture looks like. Then we tell Robert, all of it, and we let him decide. 2 weeks, Tywin said. 1. 10 days. 1 week. 7 days. If you can't find the truth in 7 days with the resources of Casterly Rock behind you, it can't be found. Tywin's mouth thinned. 7 days, Tywin said. Starting tomorrow. Starting now, Ned said. Tywin looked at him, the green-gold eyes. The assessment. Starting now, Tywin agreed. They went back to the records. The spider. What Varys knew. Varys came to them on the second day, uninvited, which was how Varys always arrived, like weather, at his own schedule, impossible to prevent. He came to the Hand's study, where Ned and Tywin were working, Ned reading Jon Arryn's correspondence, Tywin cross-referencing the Crown's financial records with the Master of Coins reports, and he sat in the chair that neither of them had offered him and folded his hands and waited to be acknowledged. Tywin acknowledged him, not warmly. Lord Varys, Lord Lannister, Lord Stark. The powdered face, the soft voice, the eyes that saw everything and admitted to seeing nothing. I understand you are investigating the circumstances of Lord Arryn's death. Robert told you, Ned said. Robert told no one. I know because I make it my business to know things that no one has told me. Varys smiled. The spider's smile, thin, practiced, offering warmth the way a fisherman offered bait. I have come to be helpful. How helpful, Tywin said. Very. I have information about Lord Arryn's investigation, information that may accelerate your own. He held the folded hands. And information about another matter, a matter involving the Master of Coin, that I believe is connected. Ned and Tywin exchanged a glance. It was the first glance they had shared that was not hostile, the glance of two men who had just received the same information and were processing it simultaneously. The Master of Coin, Tywin said. Littlefinger. Lord Baelish, yes. Varys adjusted his sleeves. Lord Arryn had become concerned in his final months about certain irregularities in the Crown's finances. The Crown is in debt, deeply in debt. 6 million gold dragons to the Iron Bank of Braavos, 3 million to your lordship's house, additional sums to the Faith and to various Tyroshi trading companies. The debt has grown consistently during Lord Baelish's tenure as Master of Coin. Debt grows, Tywin said. That is the nature of governance. Debt grows when revenue is insufficient, but the Crown's revenue has not been insufficient. Lord Baelish has been remarkably effective at generating income, taxes, tariffs, investments. The money comes in. Varys paused, and then it goes out, in quantities that do not match the expenditures that the small council has approved. You're saying Littlefinger is stealing from the Crown, Ned said. I'm saying that the Crown's books do not balance, and that Lord Baelish is the man responsible for balancing them, and that Lord Arryn was looking at the books before he died. Varys unfolded his hands. I'm also saying that Lord Arryn visited a certain armourer in the Street of Steel, a man named Tobho Mott, 3 times before his death, and that Lord Baelish visited the same armourer once, after Lord Arryn's death, to inquire about what Lord Arryn had been asking. Ned looked at Tywin. Tywin looked at the financial records on the desk. How long have you known this? Tywin said. I know many things, Lord Lannister. The question is never how long I have known them, but when the knowing becomes useful. Varys stood. I will leave you to your investigation. If you require additional information, I am, as always, available. He left. The room was quiet. He's playing us, Ned said. Of course he's playing us. Varys plays everyone. The question is whether the information he's providing is accurate, and the answer is almost certainly yes, because Varys does not give false information. He gives true information at the moment when the truth serves his purposes. And what are his purposes? Stability. Varys serves stability the way I serve legacy, and you serve honor. It is the organizing principle. He wants the realm stable because instability threatens his position. An alliance between us threatens instability. Therefore, Varys supports the alliance. For now. For now. Until the alliance threatens stability in a different direction. Tywin picked up the financial records. We need to look at these. All of them. If Littlefinger is embezzling from the Crown, the embezzlement is in the details. You read the books. I'll talk to Tobho Mott. Tywin looked at him. The assessment again, the weighing, the calculation, the decision about whether this particular division of labour served the investigation or served Ned's desire to work alone. Take someone with you, Tywin said. Not one of your northerners, one of mine. I want independent verification of whatever the armourer says. You don't trust me to report honestly? I trust you to report honestly. I don't trust you to notice the things that aren't said. You hear words, Lord Stark. I hear what's behind them. My man hears the behind. Ned wanted to argue. The argument died before it reached his mouth because Tywin was, again, not wrong. Ned heard words and took them at face value, and the South was a place where face value was the first layer of a thing that had 17 layers, and a man who stopped at the first layer missed the other 16. Fine, Ned said. Send your man. Kevin, Tywin said. My brother. He hears the behind better than anyone except me. Ned went to the Street of Steel. Tywin went to the books. The investigation had its first direction, and the direction was not what either of them had expected. Not the succession, not the incest, not the court's 1,000 small treacheries. The direction was the money, and the money led to Littlefinger, the armourer. What Gendry's face showed. Tobho Mott's shop was in the Street of Steel, which was the armourer's quarter of King's Landing, a street of forges and anvils and the constant ringing of hammer on metal that sounded to Ned like a smaller and more useful version of the noise the court made. Mott was a Cohoric mastersmith, one of the finest armourers in the known world, a man whose work was sought by lords and princes and who had, John Arryn's notes indicated, a particular apprentice in his employ. An apprentice named Gendry. Ned found the apprentice in the forge. The boy was perhaps 15. He was dark-haired, blue-eyed, broad-shouldered, with a jaw that Ned had seen before, on a younger Robert Baratheon, 20 years ago, in the Eyrie, before the war and the throne and the weight of the world had turned the young warrior into the heavy king. The resemblance was not subtle. It was the kind of resemblance that struck you across a room and that required no lineage book to identify. Gendry was Robert's bastard. That was obvious. What was also obvious, and what Ned understood now, standing in the forge with Tywin Lannister behind him and the boy in front of him, was why John Arryn had visited. Arryn had come to see the proof. The proof that Baratheon blood ran true. Dark hair, blue eyes, dominant in every union, unmistakable. If the bastard had Robert's features, then the true-born children should have Robert's features. The true-born children did not. The mathematics were simple and devastating. Ned looked at Gendry. Gendry looked back with the slightly wary expression of a boy who had been visited by lords before, and who did not understand why lords cared about a bastard armourer's apprentice. "You're the king's son," Ned said. "My lord." "Nothing." Ned turned to Tywin. "We've seen enough." They left the forge. In the street, with the hammering behind them and the stink of King's Landing around them, Ned looked at Tywin Lannister, Tywin's brother, a quieter version of the same architecture, broad where Tywin was lean, warm where Tywin was cold, but with the same Lannister eyes that missed nothing. "The boy is Robert's," Tywin said. "Yes. Dark hair, blue eyes, Robert's jaw. The Baratheon blood runs true." Tywin was quiet for a moment. "And my niece's children are not Robert's." "No." They walked back to the Red Keep in silence. And the silence was the silence of two men who had just confirmed a truth that was going to burn everything it touched. The books. What the numbers said. While Ned was at the forge, Tywin was in the books, and the books were telling him a story that made his jaw ache with the effort of not breaking the desk. Littlefinger's financial records were brilliantly constructed. That was the first thing Tywin noticed, and the noticing carried with it a grudging respect that Tywin did not enjoy feeling, because the respect was for a man who was, Tywin was increasingly certain, a thief operating at a scale that made common embezzlement look like pickpocketing. The records showed income. Impressive income. Littlefinger had increased the Crown's revenue substantially during his tenure, through new tariffs, strategic investments in the port of King's Landing, and a network of tax collectors that was more efficient than anything the Crown had operated before. On the surface, the master of coin was a genius. Underneath the surface, the genius was hollow. The money came in. The money went out. But the going out did not match the approved expenditures. There were gaps. Not large enough to be obvious, not large enough to catch the eye of a casual auditor, but consistent. A few thousand dragons here, a few thousand there, spread across hundreds of transactions, hidden in rounding errors and administrative costs and the natural messiness of a kingdom's finances. Tywin traced the gaps for 6 hours. He did not eat. He did not drink. He sat at the desk and followed the numbers the way a hunter followed tracks, with the patient attention of a man who had managed the largest fortune in Westeros for 40 years and who could read a ledger the way most men read faces. The gaps led to accounts. The accounts led to names. The names were fronts, businesses, trading companies, investment partnerships that existed on paper and nowhere else. The fronts led to bravos. The Bravosi accounts led to purchases. The purchases were interesting. Littlefinger had been buying loyalty, not with his own money, with the crown's money, laundered through a network of phantom enterprises and funneled to lords and knights and merchants who owed their position to the master of coin's quiet generosity. It was not embezzlement in the traditional sense. Littlefinger was not filling his own vaults. He was building a network of men who owed him, who depended on him, who would support him when the time came, and the time was whatever Littlefinger was waiting for. Tywin set down the last ledger. He sat in the evening light and felt the full shape of it. Not just the financial manipulation, but the strategy behind it. Littlefinger was not a common thief. Littlefinger was a man who was building power from scratch, without an army or a name or a family, using nothing but money and information and the willingness to wait. It was, Tywin reflected, exactly what he would have done in Littlefinger's position. The thought was not complimentary. Ned returned from the forge. "The boy is Robert's," Ned said. "I know." "Which confirms." "I know what it confirms." Tywin held up a ledger. "I have something as well." He laid out the financial evidence, the gaps, the fronts, the network, the purchases, the quiet, patient, brilliant construction of a shadow power structure inside the crown's own machinery. Ned listened. "Littlefinger has been stealing from the crown," Ned said when Tywin finished. "Littlefinger has been building an army. Not a military army, a political one. A network of men who owe him everything, and who will do whatever he asks when he decides to use them." Tywin set the ledger down, and Jon Arryn found this, or was finding it. The financial investigation and the bloodline investigation were happening simultaneously. Arryn was pulling on two threads at once, and both threads led to the same conclusion. The court is compromised. By Littlefinger, and by my daughter. Tywin's voice did not change when he said it. The granite held. Two different compromises, two different threats, both discovered by the same man, both sufficient to get a man killed. Which one killed him? Tywin looked at the ledgers, at the correspondence, at the careful, meticulous records of a dead hand who had been pulling on two threads and who had not lived to see where they led. "I don't know," Tywin said, "but I know who benefits most from his death. Littlefinger." If Arryn was about to expose the financial manipulation, Littlefinger had a motive. If Arryn was about to expose the succession fraud, Cersei had a motive. Both of them benefit from Arryn's silence. He held the pause. But only one of them is smart enough to have arranged a poisoning that looked natural. "You don't think Cersei killed him?" "My daughter is many things. Subtle is not among them. If Cersei wanted someone dead, she would do it in a way that announced it, loudly, dramatically, with Lannister gold and Lannister fury. She would not use tears of Lys in an old man's wine. That requires patience. Cersei has never been patient. Then Littlefinger. Littlefinger, using someone close to Arryn, someone who had access to his food, his wine, his daily routine. Someone who could administer the poison without suspicion. Tywin looked at Ned. Someone like Arryn's wife. The room was very still. "Lisa," Ned said. "Lisa Arryn. Who is Petyr Baelish's, what would you call it? Friend, ally, creature. She has been in his orbit since they were children. She went to the Eyrie after her husband's death. She took her son. She fled." Tywin's voice was clinical. People who flee after their husband's death flee because they are afraid, or because they are guilty. Ned sat with this. Lisa, Catelyn's sister, Jon Arryn's wife. The woman who had written to Catelyn warning that the Lannisters had killed Jon Arryn. The letter that had set half of Ned's own suspicions in motion. The letter that had blamed the Lannisters. "The letter," Ned said. "Lysa sent a letter to Catelyn before I came south. She said the Lannisters killed Jon Arryn. Tywin went very still. She blamed my family. Yes, for a murder that she may have committed herself. At Littlefinger's direction. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the silence of two men who had just realized that the manipulation was deeper than either had anticipated, that Littlefinger had not merely killed the Hand, but had arranged the aftermath to turn the two most powerful families in the realm against each other. The Starks would blame the Lannisters. The Lannisters would defend against the Starks. The realm would split, and in the chaos, Littlefinger would rise. He was going to start a war, Ned said. He was going to start our war, Tywin said. Yours and mine. Stark against Lannister. The lie about Jon Arryn's death was designed to create exactly the conflict that Robert prevented by putting us in the same room. He looked at Ned. Robert may be smarter than either of us gave him credit for. Robert's not smart. He's experienced. He knows what war looks like, and he didn't want to see it again. The distinction doesn't matter. The result is the same. We're working together instead of killing each other, and Littlefinger's plan has failed, assuming we act before he adjusts. Then we act, Ned said. Not yet. You keep saying that. Because you keep wanting to act before we're ready. We have two problems, Littlefinger and the succession. We need to solve both. If we arrest Littlefinger without addressing the succession, Cersei's secret remains, and someone else discovers it, and the war happens anyway. If we address the succession without arresting Littlefinger, he adjusts his plan, and we face a new version of the same threat. Tywin looked at Ned. Both, at the same time. That's the only move that works. And my daughter. The voice was Tywin's, but the word was not a word Ned had expected to hear from him. The possessive, the acknowledgement that the succession crisis was not an abstraction, but a family catastrophe. Cersei needs to be managed before Robert knows, not to protect her, to control the damage. What does managed mean? Ned said. In your vocabulary. It means I talk to her, privately, before anyone else does, and I tell her what is going to happen, and I give her the choice between compliance and consequences. And if she chooses consequences, then she gets consequences. Tywin's face was granite. She is my daughter, but she has endangered my legacy, my family's position, and the stability of the realm. If she will not cooperate, I will treat her the way I treat any threat to the Lannister name. Ned looked at him. He did not ask what that meant. He had seen what Tywin did to threats to the Lannister name. He had seen the results at King's Landing, at the end of the rebellion, the bodies of Elyria's children, wrapped in Lannister cloaks. No one dies, Ned said. Whatever you do with Cersei, whatever consequences you impose, no one dies. Not her, not the children. The children are not in danger. I do not kill children. Tywin's voice had an edge that was sharper than usual, and Ned heard in it the one subject that could crack the granite, the mountain and the babies, the thing Tywin had ordered and that had followed him for 17 years. Whatever you think of me, Lord Stark, I do not kill children. You've killed children before. I gave an order that was interpreted more broadly than I intended. The execution was Gregor Clegane's doing, not mine. You sent the mountain. You knew what the mountain was. I knew what the mountain was useful for. I did not order the killing of infants. The edge was steel now. We are not here to relitigate the rebellion. We are here to save the realm from a civil war that Littlefinger is manufacturing, and that my daughter's foolishness has made possible. If you cannot focus on the present threat without lecturing me about the past, this alliance ends here. The room held the tension. Ned wanted to press it. Every fibre of his Stark honor wanted to press it, to force Tywin to account for Elya's children, for the mountain, for the 17 years of silence that had followed. But pressing it would end the alliance, and ending the alliance would give Littlefinger exactly what he wanted. "No one dies," Ned said again. "That's the condition." "No one dies," Tywin said. "That's the commitment." They held the agreement between them like a blade, sharp, conditional, equally dangerous to both. "Talk to Cersei," Ned said. "Tonight. Tell her what we've found. Give her the choice." "And you?" "I'll prepare the case against Littlefinger. When we go to Robert, we go with everything. The financial fraud, the poisoning, the manipulation. All of it." Agreed. They separated. Tywin to his daughter, Ned to the evidence. The alliance held. It was not comfortable. It was not pleasant. It was the worst political partnership either man had ever endured, and it was the most effective. And the effectiveness was what mattered. Tywin and Cersei won. The conversation no one heard. Tywin went to Cersei's chambers at the hour of the wolf, which was midnight, which was the hour when the court slept and the corridors were empty, and a conversation that would destroy a dynasty could be had without witnesses. He did not knock. He entered. This was not courtesy. Tywin did not do courtesy with his children. He did authority. Cersei was awake. She was at her vanity, brushing her hair in the candlelight, and when the door opened and her father walked in, she turned with the expression of a woman who had been expecting bad news and was now receiving it. "Father." Tywin closed the door. He sat in the chair beside the cold hearth and looked at his daughter and did the thing that Tywin did before he spoke, which was to hold the silence until the other person's composure cracked. He had used this technique on lords and kings and generals. He used it now on his daughter. Cersei's composure did not crack. She had learned this trick from him. "You know," she said. "I know." "How long?" "I have suspected. I know now because Jon Arryn's investigation made it impossible to continue suspecting instead of knowing. The investigation that someone killed him to stop." Cersei set down the brush. "I didn't kill Jon Arryn," she said. "I know you didn't. You lack the subtlety. Someone else killed him. Someone who benefits from the chaos his death creates, and who has been using you, daughter, the way a swordsman uses a blade, without care for the blade. Nobody uses me. Littlefinger has been using you. Littlefinger has been using everyone. He manufactured the conditions that allowed your—" Tywin chose his word. "Indiscretion to persist. Because a queen whose succession is fraudulent is a queen who can be controlled, and a queen who can be controlled is a tool. I am not a tool. Then stop behaving like one." Tywin's voice did not rise. It did not need to. The flatness was worse than shouting, the measured, clinical dissection of a daughter's choices by a father who had expected better. "You have committed the single most destructive act in the history of our house. Not the rebellion, not the mad king. You. 3 children on the throne who carry Lannister blood and no Baratheon blood, and every day they sit in that line of succession is a day the Lannister legacy is built on a lie that will, eventually, collapse." Cersei's face did several things: pride, defiance, fear. The combination that was pure Cersei, the refusal to accept criticism layered over the knowledge that the criticism was earned. "They're mine," Cersei said. "Whatever you call them, bastards, frauds, whatever name you put on it, they are mine. And Jaime's. And they are more Lannister than any true-born Baratheon would have been. They are abominations in the eyes of the faith and treasons in the eyes of the law. And I do not care whose eyes they are beautiful in, mine, yours, or Jaime's. What I care about is the future of this house." Tywin leaned forward. "You have a choice. The same choice I have been giving to every lord who has ever threatened the Lannister position. Comply or be removed. You wouldn't. I have removed better men than you for lesser offences. Tywin held his daughter's gaze. This is what compliance looks like. Tomorrow morning, Ned Stark and I go to Robert. We tell him the truth, all of it. Not just the children, the full picture. Littlefinger's manipulation, Lisa Arryn's poisoning, the manufactured instability, the threat to the realm. You are one piece of a larger crisis, and the crisis is going to be addressed as a whole. Robert will kill me. Robert will not kill you because I will not allow it, and because Ned Stark, who you should be thanking on your knees, has made it a condition of the alliance that no one dies. You, Cersei, have been saved by the honor of the man you've spent 15 years mocking. Cersei's face went through something. What happens to me? She said. Not the proud Cersei voice. The smaller one. The daughter's voice. You go to Casterly Rock. You take the children. You live in comfort and safety under my protection. The children's status will be reclassified. They will not be Baratheons. They will be Lannisters. Acknowledged. Not legitimate, but protected. Nobody touches them. And Jaime? Tywin held the silence. Jaime will face his own reckoning, Tywin said. The Kingsguard may strip him. The king may punish him. I cannot protect Jaime from the consequences of what Jaime has done. He's your son. He's a man who broke his Kingsguard oath, cuckolded his king, and fathered children who are going to upend the succession of the Seven Kingdoms. I love my son. I cannot save him from the consequences of being a fool. Tywin stood. The choice. Comply or be removed. I need your answer now. Cersei looked at her father. She was 50 things at once. Proud, furious, terrified, defiant, calculating, cornered. She was every version of herself that had ever existed, compressed into a single moment in a candlelit chamber, and the compression was producing something that Tywin had rarely seen in his daughter. Clarity. I'll comply, Cersei said, but I want one thing. Name it. Joffrey is told first. By me. Not by Robert. Not by you. By me. He's my son, and he deserves to hear it from his mother before the world tells him he's whatever they'll call him. Tywin looked at his daughter. Agreed, he said. He left. In the corridor, alone, Tywin Lannister stood in the dark and allowed himself for 3 seconds to feel the full weight of what his daughter had done, and what it had cost, and what it was going to cost. 3 seconds of the grief that lived behind the granite. Then the granite closed over it, and Tywin walked back to the Hand's study to tell Ned Stark that Cersei would comply. 3 seconds was enough. Littlefinger. How they caught the spider's rival. Ned built the case against Littlefinger with the methodical thoroughness that he brought to everything. The northern patience, the refusal to cut corners, the conviction that evidence assembled correctly was more powerful than any sword. He worked through the night while Tywin confronted Cersei. He organized the financial records into a narrative that even a man who did not understand commerce could follow. Here is the money that came in. Here is the money that went out. Here are the places where the going out does not match the approved expenditures. Here are the phantom enterprises. Here are the lords who received the phantom money and who owe their positions to the master of coin's invisible generosity. He found 11 lords. 11 men in positions of influence, tax collectors, harbour masters, minor council functionaries, castle stewards, who had been placed by Littlefinger and whose loyalty ran to Littlefinger and not to the crown. 11 men who formed a network that spanned King's Landing and the Crownlands and the Riverlands and the Vale. A web of obligation that gave the master of coin a reach that no master of coin was supposed to have, It was, Ned reflected, a shadow government. Not a replacement for the crown. Nothing so dramatic. A supplement. A parallel structure that could influence decisions, redirect resources, and manipulate outcomes without anyone noticing. Because the manipulation was happening in the margins, in the rounding errors, in the 1,000 small transactions that nobody bothered to audit. Jon Arryn had bothered. Jon Arryn had looked at the margins and seen the shape of it, and the seeing had killed him. And Ned was sitting in the dead man's chair, finishing the work the dead man had started. He added the Lysa connection, the letter to Catelyn, the letter blaming the Lannisters for Arryn's death. The motive. Lysa had been Littlefinger's since childhood, in love with a man who did not love her back, but who was willing to use her love as a tool. Littlefinger had directed the poisoning. Lysa had administered it. The blame had been redirected to the Lannisters, because a Stark-Lannister conflict was Littlefinger's desired outcome, the chaos he needed to rise. By morning, the case was complete. Not airtight, Ned was honest enough to recognize the gaps, the places where the evidence was circumstantial rather than direct, the connections that required inference rather than proof. But strong enough for a king. Tywin returned at dawn. Cersei will comply, Tywin said. Good. She will go to Casterly Rock. The children go with her. She tells Joffrey first. Agreed. Tywin looked at the documents on the desk, the financial records, the network analysis, the case against Littlefinger arranged in the careful, methodical, northern style that was Ned's signature. You've been thorough, Tywin said. It was the closest thing to a compliment that Tywin Lannister had ever given Ned Stark, and it was delivered with the enthusiasm of a man complimenting the craftsmanship of a weapon that had been pointed at his family. The case is strong, not perfect, but strong enough. Then we go to Robert. Now, before Littlefinger learns what we've found, before the court wakes up, before anyone has time to adjust. Ned looked at the morning light coming through the hands' windows. Together, he said. Together, Tywin said. They walked to the king's chambers. Together. Robert, the king who listened. They found Robert awake, which was unusual for dawn, and sober, which was more unusual. He was sitting in his chambers with a plate of cold beef and a cup of water, not wine, and he looked at Ned and Tywin when they entered with the expression of a man who had been waiting for this conversation, and who was not looking forward to it. Tell me, Robert said. Ned told him. He told him everything. The lineage investigation, the financial fraud, the poisoning, the manufactured instability. He laid out the evidence with the northern directness that was his strength and his curse, the refusal to soften or evade or present the truth in anything other than its full shape. Tywin supplemented. Where Ned provided evidence, Tywin provided analysis. Where Ned showed what had happened, Tywin explained why. Where Ned presented the case, Tywin presented the implications, the political consequences, the succession crisis, the threat to the realm. Robert listened. He listened the way Robert had listened at the start of the rebellion, not with the court face or the drinking companion face, but with the war face, the face of a man who was processing a threat and deciding how to meet it. The war face was the Robert that people forgot existed, the Robert who had smashed a dynasty at the Trident, the Robert who was, underneath the wine and the hunting and the years of peacetime softness, still a man who knew how to fight. When they finished, Robert was quiet. The quiet lasted. It lasted past the point where most men would have broken it with a curse or a thrown cup or the rage that was Robert's usual response to bad news. This quiet was different. This quiet was the sound of a man who had been hit in the chest and who was absorbing the impact before he responded. "My children," Robert said. They are not your children by blood, Ned said. They are Cersei's and Jaime's. Jaime! Robert's jaw, the muscle, the tension. My Kingsguard? Yes. In my bed? Yes. Robert stood. He went to the window. He looked out at King's Landing, the city he had governed for 15 years, the kingdom he had won at the Trident, the throne he had never wanted, and that was now, it turned out, occupied by a succession of children who were not his. I want to kill them all, Robert said. Ned opened his mouth. Tywin spoke first. No, Tywin said. Robert turned, the war face, the Baratheon fury, building. No, Tywin repeated. You do not want to kill them all. You want to hurt the people who have hurt you. That is understandable. It is also the reaction that Pater Baelish has been counting on. The rage, the chaos, the kingdom tearing itself apart, because the king chose his hammer over his head. Don't tell me what to choose. I am telling you what the enemy wants you to choose. Littlefinger has spent years engineering this moment, the moment when the truth comes out and the king responds with war. He has built his entire strategy around the assumption that Robert Baratheon will react like Robert Baratheon always reacts, with fury. If you give him fury, you give him victory. Robert's hands were fists. What do you suggest I do? Forgive them. I suggest you punish them effectively rather than satisfyingly. Tywin stood. The two biggest men in the room, Robert built like a bull, Tywin built like a blade, facing each other across the king's chambers. Cersei goes to Casterly Rock. The children go with her. Jaime is stripped of the Kingsguard and sent to the Rock as well. The succession passes to Stannis, who is your brother and your heir by blood. Littlefinger is arrested, tried and executed. The financial network is dismantled. The crown's debts are restructured. And nobody dies. Nobody dies except Littlefinger. Who deserves it? Robert looked at Ned. Ned nodded. It's the right course. I hate it too. But it's right. You hate it. I hate that the people who cuckolded you walk away with their lives. I hate that Cersei goes to a comfortable exile instead of a cell. I hate that Jaime loses a cloak instead of his head. Ned held Robert's gaze. But the alternative is a war with Tywin Lannister, a war you'd win eventually, but that would kill thousands of people who had nothing to do with Cersei's bed. And the children, Robert, they didn't choose their parents. They are children. Robert held the fists. The Stark honor and the Lannister pragmatism, Robert said. Both telling me the same thing. For once, Tywin said. That's how I know it's probably right. Robert opened his fists. All right, do it. Cersei to the Rock. Jaime stripped. Littlefinger arrested. Stannis named heir. He looked at both of them. But I want to be there when Littlefinger is taken. I want him to see my face. That can be arranged, Tywin said. And Ned, you're my hand. Officially. The investigation is over. Now you govern. Ned looked at Tywin. The glance was complicated, the acknowledgement that the investigation had worked because they had done it together, and the question of whether the togetherness extended beyond the investigation. And Lord Lannister? Ned said to Robert. Robert looked at Tywin. Stay, Robert said. In King's Landing, for a while. The realm is about to get very loud, and I need the wolf and the lion both until the noise dies down. Tywin looked at Ned. Ned looked at Tywin. I'll stay, Tywin said. For a while. A while, Ned said. Not forever. Lord Stark, if I had to work with you forever, I would throw myself from the highest tower of the Red Keep. The feeling is mutual, Lord Lannister. Robert, for the first time since they had entered his chambers, laughed. Not the court laugh, the real laugh, the Robert laugh. The one from before the throne and the weight and the 15 years of marriage to a woman who had been sleeping with her brother. Gods, Robert said. You two are going to save the kingdom and hate every moment of it. That's the arrangement, Ned said. That's always the arrangement, Tywin said. Littlefinger! The arrest! They arrested Peter Baelish at midday in his offices, with the financial records arranged on his own desk like an accusation made of paper. Ned brought the Stark household guard. Tywin brought Lannister men. The doubling was deliberate, Ned's men for the arrest's legitimacy, Tywin's men for its teeth. The court needed to see both houses acting in concert, the wolf and the lion moving together, the alliance made visible. Littlefinger was at his desk when they entered. He was a small man, compact, dark-haired, with the sharp features and the sharper eyes of a man who had been born into minor nobility and had risen through nothing but talent and the willingness to trade on other people's weaknesses. He looked up when Ned entered, and then he looked at Tywin behind Ned, and then he looked at the guards. And something in his face, the smile, the easy charm, the permanent performance of a man who had never shown his real face to anyone, shifted by a fraction. Lord Stark, Littlefinger said. Lord Lannister. What a surprise. No, it isn't, Tywin said. No, Littlefinger agreed. It isn't. He set down his quill. You've found the books. We've found everything, Ned said. The embezzlement, the network, the phantom companies, the 11 lords you've placed in the crown service who owe their loyalty to you and not the king. 13, Littlefinger corrected. You missed 2. The correction was pure Littlefinger, the compulsion to be precise, to demonstrate competence, even when the competence was the thing that was destroying him. Ned saw it and filed it under the heading of men who valued their own cleverness more than their survival. We've also found your connection to Lysa Arryn, Ned said. And the poisoning. Littlefinger's face changed. Not much. The man was disciplined. Ned gave him that. But the mention of Lysa cracked something that the financial charges had not. Because the financial charges were abstract, and the poisoning was murder, and murder was the charge that put a man's head on a spike. That's a strong accusation, Littlefinger said. Do you have evidence, or merely the spider's whispers? Evidence, Tywin said. Not as much as I'd like. Enough for a trial. Enough for a king who is already inclined to believe us, because the king has spent the last hour learning that his wife's children are not his, and that the master of coin has been building a shadow government inside his court, and the king is not in a forgiving mood. Littlefinger looked at them. The look was the most honest thing Ned had ever seen from the man, not the charm, not the performance, not the careful mask that had let him navigate the court for 15 years. Just a man calculating his odds and finding them insufficient. You were supposed to fight each other, Littlefinger said. Soft, almost to himself. That was the whole. The entire architecture was built around the premise that Stark and Lannister would never... He stopped. Robert put you together. Robert put us together, Ned said. Robert. The drunk. The hunter. The man who... Littlefinger's mouth twisted. The man who was supposed to be the easiest king in the world to manipulate. And instead, he did the one thing nobody anticipated. He thought. He's not as stupid as you needed him to be, Tywin said. Nobody is, apparently. Littlefinger looked at his desk. At the records. At the quill he had set down. I assume there's no negotiation available. There is not, Ned said. Then I'd like to observe that this is, strategically, the most elegant thing Robert Baratheon has ever done, and that the two of you working together is, he paused, profoundly unfair. Arrest him, Tywin said to the guards. They arrested him. He went without fighting. Littlefinger was not a man who fought with his body. He was a man who fought with information and opportunity, and both had just been taken from him. The court watched the arrest. The court watched the Wolf's guards and the Lion's guards flanking the Master of Coin through the corridors of the Red Keep, and the watching was its own message. The two most powerful houses in the realm are working together, and the man who tried to turn them against each other is in chains. The message landed. Ned saw it in the faces of the courtiers, in the recalculation that happened in every eye, the reassessment of alliances, the repositioning of loyalties, the instant understanding that the political landscape had just changed and that the men who had been playing the old game needed to learn the new one. The new game had a wolf and a lion on the same side of the board. The old game's best player was being led to the black cells. The succession, how it was handled. The succession crisis was announced in the throne room 3 days after Littlefinger's arrest, with the full court present and the Iron Throne empty behind Robert, because Robert refused to sit in it during an announcement that revealed the throne's succession had been fraudulent for 15 years. Robert stood. He stood because standing was Robert's natural state for things that mattered, and because the throne was the thing that had been lied about, and standing away from it was the only honest position. "My wife has confessed," Robert said. He did not elaborate on the nature of the confession, because the elaboration was not necessary. The court already knew, or had guessed, or had been informed by the network of whispers that was the Red Keep's primary form of communication. "The children I have raised as mine are not mine by blood. The succession of the Iron Throne is amended. My heir is my brother, Stannis Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone." The court received this with the silence of people who had been expecting something and had received it and were now processing the implications. Stannis was present. He stood at the front of the hall with the iron composure that was his signature, the jaw grinding, the eyes flat, the face of a man who had just been given what he believed was rightfully his, and who was not going to celebrate it, because celebration was not what Stannis did. Cersei was not present. She had left for Casterly Rock the night before, with the 3 children and a Lannister escort that was half protection and half imprisonment. She had left in silence, without ceremony, the departure of a queen who was no longer a queen, and the court had watched her go and calculated. "Lord Stark serves as my hand," Robert continued. "Lord Lannister serves as an advisor to the crown for the duration of the transition. These arrangements are not negotiable." The court absorbed this. Ned saw the absorption differently from Tywin. Ned saw the faces, the lords and ladies, the minor councillors, the functionaries and servants who made the court run. He saw compliance, acceptance. The political class doing what the political class did when the ground shifted, adjusting. Tywin saw something else. Tywin saw the calculations, the assessments being run behind the compliant faces, the questions being asked that no one would ask out loud. How strong is this alliance? How long will it last? What happens when the wolf and the lion disagree? Where are the cracks? Tywin saw, in particular, the face of Mace Tyrell. The Lord of Highgarden was a large, florid man who was the least interesting person in any room he entered, and who was, because of this, frequently underestimated. People forgot that Mace Tyrell controlled the largest army in the 7 Kingdoms and the most productive agricultural land, and that the Reach's wealth was second only to the Westerlands. People forgot because Mace was a forgettable man, and Mace used the forgetting as cover. Mace Tyrell was not calculating. He was being calculated for. His mother, Olenna, who was seated beside him and who was the actual brain of House Tyrell, was calculating. And what Olenna Tyrell was calculating, Tywin knew, was how to position the Reach in a world where the wolf and the lion had joined forces. The answer, Tywin suspected, would not be pleasant for anyone. The new hand. what governing looked like. Ned governed. Tywin advised. The distinction was important to both of them and invisible to everyone else. In practice, governing looks like arguments. Daily arguments in the hand study about every decision that the government of a kingdom required. Taxes, appointments, judicial cases, military deployments, diplomatic relations, the 1,000 small choices that held the realm together. The arguments were not the shouting kind. They were worse, the quiet, methodical, endlessly productive kind. Two men attacking a problem from opposite directions and arriving at solutions that neither would have reached alone. The crown's debt was the first argument. "We owe your house 3 million dragons," Ned said, looking at the ledger. "You do." That debt was accumulated under Littlefinger's management. Much of it may be fraudulent, inflated, manipulated, part of the embezzlement scheme. Much of it is genuine. I lent the crown real gold. I expect real gold in return. The crown doesn't have 3 million dragons. Then the crown should find them. Or the crown's creditor should accept a restructured payment schedule. The crown's creditor should accept nothing that diminishes the value of the debt. They argued about the debt for 3 hours. They emerged with a restructured schedule that reduced the interest, extended the timeline, and included a provision for Lannister trade preferences in the capital that partially offset the reduced payments. It was a solution that made Ned uncomfortable. The trade preferences felt like favoritism, and that made Tywin unsatisfied. The reduced interest felt like a loss. The discomfort and dissatisfaction were, Ned was learning, the sign that a compromise had been reached. The appointments were the second argument. Jon Arryn had left vacancies. Littlefinger's arrest had created more. The Master of Coin seat was empty. Several of Littlefinger's place men had been removed, creating gaps in the tax collection, the harbour administration, the capital's governance structure. "We need competent replacements," Ned said. "Men who are honest, experienced, and loyal to the crown." "We need men who are competent," Tywin said. "Honesty and experience are desirable. Loyalty to the crown is negotiable. Loyalty to the crown is not negotiable. Everything is negotiable. The question is the price. Lord Lannister, you cannot staff the crown's administration with men whose loyalty is for sale." "I'm not suggesting men whose loyalty is for sale. I'm suggesting men whose loyalty is informed by their interests. A man who serves the crown because his interests align with the crown's interests is more reliable than a man who serves the crown out of abstract devotion because interests are durable and devotion is not." Ned looked at him. "That is the most Lannister thing you have ever said." "I will take that as a compliment." It wasn't one. They argued about the appointments for 2 days. They emerged with a list that balanced Ned's insistence on integrity with Tywin's insistence on capability. The list included men from the north, the Westerlands, the Stormlands, and the Riverlands. A deliberate spread that announced to the realm that the new government was not a Stark Lannister monopoly, but a crown administration that drew on the kingdom's full talent. It was a lie, of course. The Stark Lannister influence was enormous. Ned's honor set the standards, and Tywin's network provided the candidates. And the combination meant that every appointee was both honest enough for Ned and smart enough for Tywin, which was a narrow overlap, but one that produced genuinely excellent administrators. Ned and Tywin developed a routine, which was remarkable because neither man enjoyed routine, and both would have denied that the routine existed. Mornings were reports. Ned read the northern dispatches and the judicial records. Tywin read the financial summaries and the intelligence from his agents in the various kingdoms. They exchanged findings at mid-morning, in the hand study, over tea that Ned drank and wine that Tywin drank, because Tywin did not drink tea and Ned did not drink wine before noon, and the two beverages, sitting side by side on the desk, were a miniature of the alliance itself. Different liquids, same table. Midday was council. The small council met, and the meetings were different now. Faster, more focused, less poisoned by the Littlefinger influence that had turned every previous council session into a performance of competence rather than the practice of it. Ned chaired the sessions. Tywin attended as advisor, which meant Tywin spoke when he wanted to speak and was silent when he wanted to be silent, and nobody, including the king, tried to compel either. Afternoons were the disputes. The kingdom's internal conflicts, border arguments, trade disagreements, succession questions among the minor houses, the constant friction of 7 kingdoms rubbing against each other, came to the hand's desk, and Ned and Tywin handled them together. They had developed a method that neither had named, but that both recognized. Ned took the first hearing, listened to both sides, and formed a judgment. Tywin took the second hearing, listened to the same sides, and formed a strategy. Then they compared Ned's judgment and Tywin's strategy, and the comparison produced solutions that were both just and effective, which was the narrow overlap that the alliance lived in. "You're too fair," Tywin would say. "The Lord of the Reach deserves more than the Lord of the Riverlands, because the Lord of the Reach brought the larger army." "Merit doesn't determine justice," Ned would say. "Both lords have valid claims. The division should reflect the claims, not the claimants' armies. In a world where armies don't matter, that's correct. We do not live in that world. We govern for that world, even if we don't live in it." The arguments were exhausting and productive, and the production was visible. The realm's disputes were being resolved faster and more fairly than at any time in recent memory, and the resolution produced something that neither Ned's honor alone nor Tywin's authority alone could have achieved. Satisfaction. Not happiness, satisfaction. The feeling of having been heard, judged fairly, and treated with respect, which was the basic currency of good governance, and which required both the hearing, Ned's gift, and the enforcing, Tywin's gift. Evenings were individual. Ned wrote to Catelyn. Tywin wrote to Kevin. Both men retreated to their own quarters and their own worlds, and the privacy that the day's constant proximity required, because 12 hours of governing with a man you did not like demanded at least 6 hours of not governing with him. They did not eat together. This was the one thing they had both agreed on without argument, that meals were personal time, not alliance time, and that breaking bread with a man you spent 12 hours arguing with was a step too far in the direction of friendship. And friendship was not what this was. The routine held. Day after day, week after week. The grinding, productive, joyless routine of 2 men who had discovered that they were better together than apart, and who were not happy about the discovery. The realm noticed. The realm noticed that the government was working, that the finances were being restructured, that the appointments were competent, that the court was cleaner, the administration tighter, the decision-making faster and more effective than it had been under Jon Arryn, not because Jon Arryn had been bad, he had been excellent, but because Jon Arryn had been one man and Ned and Tywin were 2, and the 2 brought different tools, and the different tools covered each other's blind spots. The realm also noticed that the 2 men responsible for the improvement were spending every waking hour fighting about how to do it. "They argue about everything," Robert said to Ser Barristan, watching from the training yard as Ned and Tywin walked the corridors, engaged in what appeared to be a heated dispute about harbour tariffs. "They do, Your Grace. And the kingdom's never been better governed." "It does seem that way, Your Grace." Robert shook his head. "I'll never understand politics." "Perhaps that's why you're good at it, Your Grace. You know what you don't know." Robert looked at the old knight. "That's either very wise or very insulting." "It's both, Your Grace. In my experience, the 2 are usually the same thing. Littlefinger's trial. The end of the Spider's rival." Littlefinger's trial was held in the throne room, and it was the first event in the Stark-Lannister alliance that both men agreed on completely. Ned wanted a public trial because justice required transparency. Tywin wanted a public trial because humiliation required an audience. The two motivations were entirely different, and the outcome was identical, which was, Ned reflected, the defining feature of the alliance. The charges were read by the Grand Maester: embezzlement of crown funds, construction of a shadow network of political agents using stolen resources, conspiracy to murder Jon Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie and Hand of the King, manipulation of Lisa Arryn for the purpose of administering poison, and the deliberate manufacture of false evidence designed to provoke a civil war between House Stark and House Lannister. Littlefinger stood in chains and listened to the charges with the expression of a man who was hearing a performance review of his life's work, equal parts pride and resignation. He did not deny the charges. He could not. The financial evidence was comprehensive. The Lisa connection was established, and the letter to Catelyn Stark, blaming the Lannisters, had been produced and authenticated. The case was not perfect, but it was sufficient, and Littlefinger was smart enough to know the difference between a trial he could win and one he could not. "I made this court work," Littlefinger said, when given the opportunity to speak. "For 15 years, the money that flowed through this throne came through me. The investments, the tariffs, the trade agreements that kept the realm solvent, all of it was mine. I did not inherit power. I did not receive it by birth. I built it. From nothing. A minor house in the Fingers, a boy with no army and no name and no fortune. And I built a network that rivaled any great house in the Seven Kingdoms." "You built it with stolen money," Ned said. "I built it with ingenuity. The money was a tool. I used the tool more effectively than anyone before me, including the murder of the Hand." Littlefinger held the silence. "Jon Arryn was going to expose me," he said. Not an admission, a statement of fact, delivered with the flat honesty of a man who had accepted that honesty was the only weapon he had left. He was going to expose the financial network and the succession fraud simultaneously, and the exposure would have destroyed the arrangement I had spent 15 years building. I did what any man would do when his life's work was threatened. "Any man wouldn't commit murder," Ned said. "Any man with the resources to commit murder, and the intelligence to see no alternative, would commit murder. The distinction between a lord who kills in battle and a lord who kills through poison is a distinction of method, not morality." "That's the most dangerous thing I've ever heard a man say," Ned said. "And it's the reason you're standing in chains." Tywin did not speak during the trial. He sat beside the throne and watched with the green-gold eyes that missed nothing, and his silence was its own kind of statement, the statement of a man who understood, better than anyone in the room, exactly what Littlefinger was. Because Littlefinger was what Tywin might have been, if Tywin had been born without a name and a fortune and an army. The ambition was the same. The willingness to do whatever was necessary was the same. The difference was that Tywin had been born a lion and Littlefinger had been born a mockingbird, and the lion's methods were sanctioned by power and the mockingbird's were not. Tywin understood this. He did not say it. He sat in silence and watched a version of himself be sentenced to death, and the watching was, Ned suspected, more uncomfortable for Tywin than for anyone else in the room. The sentence was death. Robert pronounced it. Ned endorsed it. Tywin's silence endorsed it. Littlefinger was executed in the yard of the Red Keep at dawn by the King's justice. Ned did not swing the sword. This was not the North, and the King's justice in King's Landing was performed by the royal executioner. But Ned stood and watched, because a man who sentenced another to death should witness the death, and because the witnessing was the price of authority. Littlefinger died without final words. He had spent his last words at the trial, and the trial words had been the most honest thing Peter Baelish had ever said, which was not very honest, but was honest enough for a man who had built his entire life on the principle that truth was a commodity to be traded rather than a virtue to be served. The court watched the execution. The court learned. The first real fight. Justice and expedience. The first real fight, not the productive arguments about tariffs and appointments, but the kind of fight that threatened to end the alliance before it was 3 months old, was about a lord named Janos Slynt. Slynt was the commander of the City Watch. He had been appointed by Littlefinger, which made him suspect, and he had been accepting bribes from half the merchants in King's Landing, which made him guilty, and he had been operating a protection racket in Flea Bottom that made the gold cloaks indistinguishable from the criminals they were supposed to police. Ned wanted him removed, tried, and sent to the wall. Tywin wanted him removed, replaced, and kept useful. The argument started at breakfast and continued through lunch and into the evening. "The man is corrupt," Ned said. "Bribery, extortion, using the watch as a personal revenue stream. He belongs in a cell." "The man is compromised," Tywin said. "Not the same thing. A corrupt man in a cell is a problem removed. A compromised man with a leash is a tool controlled. Slynt knows King's Landing's criminal networks better than anyone alive. Strip him of command, yes, but use his knowledge before you dispose of him. Use a man who has been exploiting the city's poorest citizens for years. Use his knowledge of the networks he built to steal from them. Use his knowledge of the networks he built to dismantle them. You can't dismantle what you don't understand. Slynt understands the criminal economy of King's Landing the way I understand the financial economy of the Westerlands. Both are useful. One is honest, and the other is not. Both are useful. Usefulness does not require honesty. Governance requires honesty. Governance requires results. Results sometimes require using dishonest men for honest purposes. The argument ran for 3 hours. Ned would not budge on the justice. Tywin would not budge on the expedience. The room grew colder as the fire burned down, and neither man rose to feed it, because rising to feed the fire would have been an interruption, and neither would interrupt the other, because the argument was more important than warmth. The compromise came at midnight, when both men were tired enough to be honest instead of positional. "Strip him of command," Ned said. "Publicly, the Watch sees a corrupt commander removed. That sends the message. Agreed. Debrief him before trial. Your people. 3 days. Extract everything he knows about the criminal networks. Agreed. Then trial, public, the charges read, the evidence presented, the sentence imposed. And the sentence? The wall." Tywin looked at him. "Not execution. The wall. A life for a life. His corruption destroyed lives. The wall is the price. It's fair. It's generous. It's northern. In the north, a man who serves the wall serves the realm. Even a corrupt man can serve. In the Westerlands, a corrupt man who is sent to the wall is a corrupt man who is someone else's problem. We are not in the Westerlands." Tywin held the silence. "The wall," Tywin said. "After the debriefing. After the debriefing." They shook on it. They did not like each other more afterward, but they trusted each other's process more, and process trust was, Ned was learning, more important than personal trust in a governing partnership. Slynt was removed. The debriefing produced 3 months' worth of intelligence about King's Landing's criminal infrastructure. The trial was public. The sentence was the wall. The new commander of the City Watch was a man named Jacelyn Bywater, chosen by Ned for integrity and by Tywin for competence, and the choosing produced a commander who was both, which was the pattern. The pattern held. Stannis, what the heir calculated. "Are you? Chick, I do chick all these days." Stannis Baratheon came to Ned 3 months into the alliance, and the visit was not social. Stannis did not do social. Stannis did deliberate, strategic, purposeful communication, and the purpose of this particular communication was to assess whether the Stark-Lannister alliance was going to survive long enough to affect his position as heir. He found Ned in the Hand's study. "Lord Stark." "Lord Stannis." "I have concerns about the governance structure." "I assumed you would." Stannis sat. He sat the way Stannis did everything, precisely, without waste. The chair pulled to exactly the right distance from the desk, the posture exactly upright. "The alliance between your house and Lord Tywin's house has produced effective governance," Stannis said. "I do not dispute this. The finances are improving. The appointments are competent. The criminal elements in the capital are being addressed. But the alliance concentrates power in two houses. Power concentrated in two houses is power denied to the other five. Power denied creates resentment. Resentment creates instability. Instability creates... You've already run this calculation, haven't you?" "I run every calculation." Stannis ground his jaw. "I am Robert's heir. When Robert dies, and Robert will die, Lord Stark, the man drinks and hunts and carries 100 pounds he shouldn't, I inherit a throne that has been governed by a wolf-line alliance for however many years the alliance lasts. The lords who served under that alliance will expect it to continue. The lords who opposed it will expect it to end. I will inherit not a unified realm, but a divided one, split between the allies of the alliance and the enemies of it." "That's why we created the Great Council," Ned said, "to include the other houses, to spread the governance. The Great Council is advisory. Advisory bodies advise. They do not govern. The governing is still done by you and by Tywin, and the Great Council's advice is incorporated when it aligns with your existing plans and politely ignored when it does not." Ned looked at the man who would someday be king. Stannis was right. The Great Council was better than nothing. Ned believed that, and continued to believe it. But it was not a replacement for genuine power sharing, and Stannis, who understood power the way a mathematician understood numbers, could see the gap between the advisory and the executive. "What do you want?" Ned said. "I want a guarantee that when I inherit, the structures you've built will serve the crown, not Stark and Lannister. I want the Great Council to have real authority, not executive, but binding advisory. The king must respond to the council's recommendations publicly, accept or reject with reasons. Transparent governance. Tywin will resist. Tywin resists everything that dilutes his influence. That is not my concern. My concern is that the throne I inherit is governable." Ned looked at Stannis Baratheon, the Iron Man, the just man, the man who would be king because duty required it and not because desire did. "I'll take your proposal to Tywin," Ned said. "He'll reject it. He'll argue about it. Then he'll accept a version of it that's less than you want and more than he likes. That's how we do things. That is not a reassuring description of governance. It's the most accurate one available." Stannis ground his jaw. "Acceptable," he said. "For now." "For now is all anyone gets, Lord Stannis. In my experience, for now is usually followed by forever. I prefer to plan accordingly. Then plan, and trust that the men governing today are building something that the men governing tomorrow can improve." Stannis looked at him with the flat Baratheon assessment. "You're a better politician than you think you are," Stannis said. "That's because I don't think about politics. I think about people. The politics happen around the people. That is either profound or idiotic. It's northern. Same thing in my experience." Stannis stood. "Good day, Lord Stark. I'll expect the revised proposal within the month." "You'll have it within the week." Stannis left. Ned sat with the proposal and thought about the future, about the realm that Stannis would inherit, about the structures that would survive Ned and Tywin, about the question that every governor eventually faced. Was the thing he was building strong enough to outlast the builders? He did not know. But he would build it as if it was. Because building as if it was the only building worth doing. The Tyrells. What the Rose did. The Tyrells moved first, and they moved the way Tyrells always moved, with flowers and smiles and an army of 80,000 men behind the flowers. Mace Tyrell arrived at King's Landing 6 weeks after Cersei's departure, with a retinue that was twice the size of any lord's retinue, and that included, prominently, his daughter Margaery, who was 16 and beautiful, and whose presence at court was not coincidental. Ned saw the move immediately. Tywin saw it before Ned. "He's offering the girl," Tywin said in the hand study, reading the raven that announced Mace's visit. "To Robert, a new queen. Tyrell gold and Tyrell grain for the crown's empty coffers, a Tyrell heir in the royal nursery, and the Reach's 80,000 swords aligned with the throne. Robert doesn't need a new queen. Robert needs an heir. Stannis is his heir by law. But a king with a trueborn son is stronger than a king with a brother. Mace is offering to solve that problem." Tywin set the raven down. "It's a good move. I would have made it." "You didn't. I didn't have a daughter available. Cersei has disqualified herself." The mouth thinned. "The Tyrells have been waiting for this opportunity since the rebellion. They backed the Targaryens and lost. They've spent 15 years looking for a way back to influence. A Tyrell queen is the way back. And if Robert marries Margaery, then the Stark Lannister alliance has competition. The Tyrells become Robert's in-laws. Tyrell gold flows to the crown. Tyrell influence flows to the small council. And the balance of power that you and I have built over the last 6 weeks shifts toward Highgarden." Ned looked at the map on the wall, the map of the 7 kingdoms that Jon Arryn had kept and that Ned had inherited. The Reach was enormous. The North was enormous. The Westerlands were wealthy. 3 great regions, each with its own interest, each positioning for advantage. "Is that bad?" Ned said. Tywin looked at him. "Is a Tyrell queen bad?" Ned said. "Robert needs an heir. The Tyrells have resources the crown needs. If the marriage is genuine, no marriage between a king and a great house is ever genuine. It is a transaction. The question is whether the terms of the transaction serve the crown or serve the Tyrells. Can't they serve both? In theory, in practice, someone's interest win. If Margaery becomes queen, Olenna Tyrell becomes the most influential woman at court. Olenna is smarter than Cersei, more patient than Cersei, and more dangerous than Cersei. She will not cuckold the king with her brother. She will do something worse. She will manage him. And a managed Robert is a Robert whose hand and whose advisor become less essential." Ned heard the thing underneath Tywin's analysis. Fear. Not personal fear. Political fear. Tywin feared irrelevance the way Ned feared dishonor. A Tyrell queen would push Tywin to the margins, and the margins were where Tywin's father had lived and where Tywin had spent 40 years clawing his way out of. "We can't stop the marriage," Ned said. "If Robert wants it, it's not our place." "Of course it's our place. We are the king's hand and the king's advisor. Advising the king on his marriage is precisely our place. Advising, not deciding. The distinction is smaller than you think." They argued about the Tyrells for a week. The argument produced, eventually, a position that both could live with. Robert would meet Margaery. If the match was genuine, if Robert wanted the girl and the girl was willing, and the terms were acceptable, Ned and Tywin would support it, with conditions. The conditions were Ned's, that Tyrell influence on the small council, would be limited by the existing appointments, and Tywin's, that the crown's financial independence from Tyrell gold would be maintained through diversified revenue. Mace Tyrell arrived at court with his daughter and his mother and his army and his flowers, and the court began the elaborate dance of courtship that would determine whether the Reach became the crown's new partner or its new rival. Robert met Margaery. He liked her. Margaery was easy to like. She was charming and warm and had the Tyrell gift for making people feel important, which was the opposite of Cersei's gift for making people feel inadequate. Robert, who had spent 15 years married to a woman who had openly despised him, found the experience of being liked by a beautiful young woman genuinely disorienting. She's nice, Robert said to Ned after a dinner. He said it with the confusion of a man who had forgotten what nice felt like. She's political, Ned said. Can't she be both? In King's Landing, rarely. You're the most suspicious northerner I've ever met. I'm the most accurate northerner you've ever met. Robert married Margaery Tyrell on a day in late summer in the Sept of Baelor, with the full court present and the Stark Lannister alliance flanking the king and the Tyrell family, providing the bride and the flowers, and the sense that Westeros was, perhaps for the first time in years, moving towards something other than crisis. Ned stood as Robert's witness. Tywin stood at the back of the sept, which was Tywin's preferred position, the position from which you could see everything and be seen only when you chose to be. Margaery was, as the court had expected, radiant. She had the Tyrell gift for making public events feel personal, the ability to stand in front of 1,000 people and make each one feel individually acknowledged. She smiled at Robert, and the smile was warm, and the warmth was. Ned could not tell whether it was genuine or performed, and the inability to tell was, he supposed, the whole point. Margaery Tyrell was a better political operator than Cersei had ever been, because Cersei had performed disdain and Margaery performed warmth, and warmth was a more effective tool. She'll manage him, Tywin said to Ned at the feast afterward. Better than Cersei did. Different tools, same objective. Maybe she'll love him, Ned said. Nobody loves Robert. I love Robert. You love what Robert was, not what Robert is. Ned looked at his oldest friend, who was dancing with his new wife, dancing badly, the way Robert did everything physical that wasn't fighting, and felt the complicated love that had held the two of them together since the Eyrie. Robert had been many things. A warrior, a king, a drunk, a man who had let his kingdom run itself while he hunted and drank and mourned a woman who had been dead for 17 years. And now, somehow, Robert was a man who had done the one smart thing of his reign, put the wolf and the lion together, and the one smart thing had produced a government that was better than anything the kingdom had seen since Jaehaerys the Conciliator. I love what Robert is, Ned said. What he is includes what he was. That is either very generous or very stark. Same thing, in my experience. The marriage negotiations continued. Ned and Tywin managed them together, Ned insisting on terms that protected the crown's independence, Tywin insisting on terms that limited the Tyrell's institutional power. The negotiations were, in miniature, the same process that governed everything Ned and Tywin did. Two men attacking a problem from opposite directions and arriving at a solution that neither controlled. The Tyrells pushed back. Olenna Tyrell, in particular, pushed back with the combination of courtesy and steel that was the Queen of Thorns' signature. You're asking me to give the crown a queen and an army and a treasury and receive nothing in return except the honor of the association, Olenna said to Tywin, in a meeting that Ned attended and that felt like watching two master sword fighters who were both fighting with words. I'm asking you to accept terms that reflect the current political reality, Tywin said. The current political reality is that the crown has the wolf and the lion. The rose is welcome. The rose is not required. Not required. Olenna looked at him. Lord Tywin, every government that has ever said, "We don't need allies," has been the government that needed allies the most. We have allies. We are proposing to add another, on terms that serve the crown, on terms that serve the Lannister position at court. The Lannister position at court serves the crown. The two are currently aligned. Currently. Olenna smiled. The Tyrell's smile, warm, inviting, and underneath it, the thorns. Such a fragile word. Currently. Things change, Lord Tywin. Alliances shift. The wolf and the lion are aligned today. Will they be aligned in 5 years? 10. The Tyrells think in generations, not seasons. Ned intervened. Not because Tywin was losing. Tywin did not lose negotiations, but because the negotiation was heading toward a place where both parties would walk away with nothing. And nothing was not what the realm needed. "Lady Olenna," Ned said, "the crown needs the reach. That's not a concession, it's a fact. The crown's finances are rebuilding. The succession is in transition. The realm needs stability, and stability requires the support of the great houses, all of them, including yours." Olenna looked at him. The look was different from the look she gave Tywin, warmer, more amused, the look of a woman who enjoyed honest men because they were rare. "Lord Stark, that is the first honest thing anyone has said in this negotiation. It's the only kind of thing I say. I know, it's refreshing and exhausting." Olenna looked at Tywin, then back at Ned. "Here is what the Tyrells will accept. Margaery marries Robert. The Reach provides grain at reduced prices for 3 years. In return, Mace receives a seat on the small council, not Master of Coin, not Master of Laws, something appropriate, and the Reach's military contributions to the Crown's defense are formally recognized." Ned looked at Tywin. Tywin's mouth was thin, but not angry. "Acceptable," Tywin said. "With one amendment. The small council appointment is subject to the Hand's approval. Lord Stark's approval. Lord Stark is the Hand." Olenna looked at Ned. "Will you approve a Tyrell on the small council?" "If the Tyrell is competent, yes. Then we have terms." Olenna stood. "A pleasure, Lord Stark. A trial, Lord Tywin. I look forward to years of both." She left. Tywin looked at Ned. "You gave them too much," Tywin said. "I gave them what was necessary. You gave them a council seat. I gave them a reason to support the crown instead of undermining it. A Tyrell with a stake in the government is a Tyrell who defends the government. A Tyrell with no stake is a Tyrell who works against it." Ned looked at Tywin. "You understand this. You just don't like admitting it." Tywin's mouth thinned. "The council seat is subject to my review," Tywin said. "It's subject to the Hand's review. I am advising the Hand. The Hand will consult me. The Hand will consider your counsel, as always. You are the most infuriating man in the 7 Kingdoms. You keep saying that because it keeps being true. The Martells. What Dorne wanted. The Martells were next, and the Martells were harder. Dorne had grievances. 20-year-old grievances that were deeper and more personal than political calculation. Elya's murder, the children's deaths, the Mountain's continued existence, the Lannister role in the sack of King's Landing. The grievances were a wound that the Martells had been nursing for 2 decades, and a Stark-Lannister alliance was, from Dorne's perspective, the injury adding insult. Prince Doran sent Oberyn. This was, in the language of Dornish diplomacy, a warning. Doran sent his brother when he wanted a conversation that was frank enough to draw blood. Oberyn arrived at King's Landing with a retinue of 8 and a fury that he wore like perfume, visible, pervasive, and impossible to ignore. He met Ned first. The meeting was at Ned's request, because Ned understood, from Tywin, who understood Dornish politics the way a general understood terrain, that the Martells would refuse to meet a Lannister before they had met the Stark. The hatred was that deep. Lord Stark, Oberyn said. He was sitting in the hand study with the ease of a man who was comfortable everywhere because he was comfortable with himself. You've allied with the man who murdered my sister's children. I've allied with the man who is helping me govern the realm, Ned said. The two things are both true, and they are not comfortable together. Comfortable? Oberyn's mouth curved. You Northerners and your uncomfortable truths. In Dorne, we prefer our truths comfortable. We just don't mind them bloody. Prince Oberyn, Dorne has legitimate grievances. I know it. Tywin knows it. Tywin knows it and doesn't care. That's the difference between you and the Lion, Lord Stark. You know and care. He knows and calculates. He cares about the realm's stability. He cares about his legacy. The realm is an instrument of the legacy. Don't confuse the two. Oberyn leaned forward. I'm here because my brother sent me, and my brother sent me because Dorne is watching the Stark-Lannister alliance, and Dorne is afraid. Not of you. Starks have never threatened Dorne. Of him. Of the Lannister influence in a government that is supposed to serve all the kingdoms. The government serves all the kingdoms. The government serves the kingdoms that are represented in it. The North has a hand. The Westerlands have an advisor. The Reach is negotiating a queen. The Stormlands have an heir. The Riverlands have your wife's family. And Dorne has what? Ned looked at the Prince of Dorne's brother. He was right. The political structure that Ned and Tywin had built, efficient, effective, genuinely good for the realm, was also a structure that excluded Dorne. And excluded Dorne was angry Dorne. An angry Dorne with 20 years of Lannister grievance was a Dorne that would eventually become dangerous Dorne. What does Dorne want? Ned said. Justice, Oberyn said. For Elia, for the children, the Mountain's head. Not the metaphor, the actual head, separated from the actual body. Lord Lannister will not. Lord Lannister will do what Lord Lannister decides serves his interests. I'm not asking Lord Lannister. I'm asking you. You, Lord Stark, who rode to the Trident to overthrow a dynasty and who found at the end of it that the man who became your ally had murdered a princess and her children. You were furious. Robert told you to let it go. You let it go. Oberyn held Ned's gaze. Are you still letting it go? Ned was quiet. He was not still letting it go. He had never let it go. The images of Elia's children, wrapped in Lannister cloaks, presented to Robert's throne as proof of Tywin's loyalty. The images had lived behind Ned's eyes for 20 years, the thing that made his alliance with Tywin possible and impossible at the same time. The thing that made every productive conversation with the Lord of Casterly Rock feel like a collaboration with a man who had crossed a line that should not have been crossed. I'll talk to Tywin, Ned said. Talk. Oberyn stood. Words, Lord Stark. The North runs on words and honor, and the expectation that good men will do good things. Dorne runs on blood. We've been waiting 20 years for the blood. Don't make us wait 20 more. He left. Ned sat in the hand study and felt the weight of the thing he had just agreed to do. Confront Tywin Lannister about the murder of Elia Martell's children. The confrontation would be the hardest conversation of the alliance. It was also, Ned suspected, the most necessary. Ned and Tywin, the conversation about Elia. He brought it up in the evening, in the hand's study, after the day's arguments about harbour tariffs and northern timber exports, and a border dispute between two Riverlands houses that had consumed 3 hours and produced a compromise that made everyone miserable. The Martells want the mountain, Ned said. Tywin, who was reading a report on the Crown's grain reserves, did not look up. They've wanted the mountain for 20 years, Tywin said. The mountain is a Lannister bannerman. Handing him to Dorne would be justice. Tywin set the report down. He looked at Ned with the green-gold eyes that were, Ned had learned over weeks of daily proximity, not emotionless, but rather excessively controlled. The eyes of a man who felt things as strongly as anyone, and who had decided 40 years ago that showing it was a vulnerability he would not permit. Justice is a complicated word, Tywin said. It shouldn't be. But it is. Gregor Clegane committed atrocities. I do not deny it. The killing of the children was. He stopped. Started. Excessive. It was not what I ordered. What did you order? I ordered that the Targaryen heirs be secured. Secured, Lord Stark. Not murdered. The Mountain interpreted the order as he interpreted all orders, with maximum force and minimum thought. The result was... He stopped again. The result was a stain on my house that I have not been able to remove. You could remove it now. Give the Martells the Mountain. Giving the Martells a Lannister bannerman's head on a plate tells every bannerman in the Westerlands that Tywin Lannister sacrifices his own men to satisfy his enemies. That is not a message I can send. It's not a sacrifice. It's accountability. In the South, Lord Stark, accountability and sacrifice are distinguished by who is watching. Ned looked at him. Tywin, the first name, the first time Ned had used it. The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Tywin looked at him. Gregor Clegane murdered children, Ned said. An infant and a girl of 3, in a palace, during a sack, under your orders. He held the silence. I have worked with you for 6 weeks. I have compromised with you on things I did not want to compromise on. I have accepted your methods when they served the realm. But this I cannot compromise on. The Mountain answers for the children. Not because Dawn demands it, because it is right. Tywin held the silence for a very long time. You understand what you're asking. I'm asking you to do the right thing. I know that's not your default language. It's not about language. It's about precedent. If I hand over the Mountain, I tell the world that my bannermen can be sacrificed to maintain political alliances. Every lord in the Westerlands will question whether they are next. Then tell them the truth. Tell them Gregor Clegane murdered children on your watch, and that the Lannister standard does not protect men who murder children. Make it a principle, not a sacrifice. Make it the Lannister standard. Ned leaned forward. You want legacy, Tywin. Here's your chance to build one that isn't stained with infant blood. Tywin's jaw tightened. The room was very quiet. I will consider it, Tywin said. Consider it tonight. The Martells are waiting. I said I will consider it. I did not say I will do it. There is a process, Lord Stark. Even justice has a process. Even justice delayed is, don't quote philosophy at me. I've read more philosophy than you've seen goats. The edge was back, but different. Not the cold edge of a man defending his position, but the raw edge of a man who had been cut and who was acknowledging the cut, which was something Ned had not seen from Tywin before. I'll give you until morning, Ned said. You'll give me until I decide. Morning, Ned said. Tywin stood. He went to the door. He stopped. She was 3, Tywin said. Not to Ned, to the door, to the room, to the 20 years that had passed since a girl named Rhaenys had been killed in a palace by a monster that Tywin had sent. Rhaenys, she was 3 years old. I know. I know you know. I know the whole realm knows. Tywin's back was to Ned. I've carried it for 20 years, Lord Stark. The knowing. The fact that my order, however it was intended, produced that outcome. I have never said this to anyone. I have never. He stopped. I will give you an answer in the morning. He left. Ned sat in the hand study. He had just seen something he had not believed existed. Tywin Lannister's conscience. Not the performance of conscience, not the strategic deployment of remorse for political purposes. The real thing. Brief, controlled, immediately recontained behind the granite. But real. The morning came. Tywin's answer was 2 words. The Mountain. Gregor Clegane was arrested that week. He was sent to Dorne in chains, not to be executed by the Martells, which would have been a concession too far, but to stand trial before a Dornish court for the murders of Aelia Martell and her children. The trial was a formality. The Mountain was guilty, and everyone knew it. But the formality mattered because the formality was law, and law was the thing that distinguished justice from revenge. The Martells were not satisfied. Satisfaction would have required Tywin's head beside the mountains. But they were mollified. For now. The 20-year wound was not healed, but it was acknowledged, and the acknowledgement brought Dorne's grudging cooperation with the Stark-Lannister alliance, which was not friendship, and was not peace, but was the absence of active hostility. And in Westerosi politics, the absence of active hostility was the best you could hope for. Ned saw Tywin's face on the day the Mountain was sent south. The composure held. But underneath it, in the fraction of expression that Ned had learned to read over weeks of daily argument, there was something that might have been relief. Ned did not comment on it. Some things were better left unnamed. The counter-alliance. What grew in the shadows. The Stark-Lannister alliance was too successful, and the success created exactly the problem that success always creates in a realm built on balanced power. It unbalanced the balance. Ned saw it first in the Ravens. The Ravens came from every corner of the kingdom, from lords who had always written to the hand with their grievances and petitions and the 1,000 small demands that running a kingdom required. The Ravens came, and Ned answered them. And the answering was normal. What was not normal was the ravens that did not come. The Reach stopped writing about border disputes in the southern marches. The Vale stopped writing about fishing rights in the narrow sea. The Stormlands stopped writing about trade arrangements with the free cities. The stopping was not silence. It was coordination. The great houses that were not part of the Stark-Lannister alliance had started talking to each other instead of talking to the crown. And the talking was happening through channels that Ned's network did not reach, and that Tywin's network caught only in fragments. "They're forming a bloc," Tywin said, reading the intelligence reports that his agents in the various kingdoms provided. The reports were fragments. A Tyrell envoy visiting Sunspear, a Baratheon messenger arriving at the Eyrie, a Stokeworth knight riding to Highgarden with letters that his informants could not read. Fragments that, assembled, made a picture. A counter-alliance, Ned said. A balancing force. The Tyrells, the Martells, possibly the Vale, and almost certainly Stannis. Tywin set the reports down. Stannis is Robert's heir. If Robert dies without a true-born son, Stannis becomes king. And a king who inherits a realm dominated by a Stark-Lannister alliance is a king who begins his reign boxed in by powers he did not choose. Stannis is working against us. Stannis is protecting his future position. There is a difference, and the difference is important because Stannis is not an enemy. He is a man who is ensuring that when his time comes, the throne he inherits is not controlled by the throne's advisors. That's a reasonable concern. It is, which is why it's dangerous. Reasonable concerns attract reasonable men, and reasonable men form effective alliances. Tywin looked at the map. We built something powerful, something that works. And the working has frightened the people who were not invited to participate. Ned stood at the map. He looked at the 7 kingdoms, the regions, the houses, the lines of influence that connected them. The North and the Westerlands were the alliance's pillars. The Riverlands and the Stormlands were aligned through blood and loyalty. But the Reach, Dorne, and the Vale were not pillars. They were counterweights. And counterweights did what counterweights did. They pushed back. "We need to open the alliance," Ned said. "Open it how?" "Include them. Bring them in. Not as subordinates, as participants. The council already has a Tyrell. We need a Martell. We need someone from the Vale. We need to make the alliance look like a government and not a faction. If we include everyone, we dilute the alliance's effectiveness. The whole point of working with you, the only point, is that 2 men can make decisions faster and better than 7. If we add 5 more voices to every argument, the arguments take longer and the decisions get worse. But the government becomes more legitimate. Legitimacy is your word. Effectiveness is mine. Legitimacy is effectiveness, Tywin. A government that the great houses don't trust is a government that spends its energy defending itself instead of governing. We can be efficient and illegitimate, or inclusive and slower. I know which one survives. Tywin looked at the map. "You want to sacrifice speed for buy-in," Tywin said. "I want to sacrifice our monopoly for the realm's cooperation." Those are the same thing. Yes, they are. Tywin held the map's gaze. The green-gold eyes moving across the kingdoms, the Reach, the Vale, Dawn, the territories that were currently calculating whether the Stark-Lannister alliance was a partner or a threat. "A council of the great lords," Tywin said. "Not the small council, a larger body, representation from every kingdom, advisory, not executive. They counsel, we govern. They counsel, and we listen," Ned said. "Actually listen, not perform listening while doing what we plan to do anyway." That is literally what advisory means, Lord Stark. It is literally what advisory means in the Westerlands. In the north, advisory means you sit with your bannermen and you hear them, and you let their hearing change your mind when they're right. And when they're wrong, then you tell them they're wrong, and you explain why. And you let them disagree, and you govern anyway. But the explaining matters. The being heard matters. Men who are heard do not rebel. Men who are ignored do. Tywin turned to the map. "A great council," he said. "Advisory. Representative. Meeting, what? Quarterly. Annually. At the king's pleasure. But real. Not ceremonial. You are proposing to dilute the most effective government in the history of the 7 kingdoms because you are afraid of its effectiveness. I am proposing to strengthen the most effective government in the history of the 7 kingdoms by giving it the one thing it lacks: consent." Tywin looked at him. Consent. He said the word the way he said most of Ned's words, as if tasting something that was not poison but was not pleasant. That's a northern concept. It's a governing concept. You just haven't used it because you've always been powerful enough to govern without it. And you're right. You can. But can doesn't mean should. A government that governs by can last a generation. A government that governs by consent lasts a dynasty. Tywin looked at him for a long time. "You've gotten better at this," Tywin said. "At what?" "At arguing with me. When you arrived, you argued with honor. Now you argue with strategy. The honor is still there, but the strategy is new." The mouth thinned again, but differently. Not disapproval. Something closer to acknowledgement. "You're learning. I've had a good teacher. Don't credit me for your improvement. It undermines your authority. I wasn't crediting you. I was stating a fact. Facts and credits are the same thing in politics." Tywin picked up the intelligence reports. "A great council, advisory, representative. I'll draft the proposal if you draft the invitation." "Agreed." "And Lord Stark?" "Yes. If the Great Council becomes a venue for the other houses to obstruct our governance, I will dissolve it." If the Great Council becomes a venue for the other houses to obstruct our governance, we have failed as governors, and dissolving it will be the least of our problems." Something crossed Tywin's face, not disapproval. "Point taken," Tywin said. It was the second closest thing to a concession Ned had ever heard from Tywin Lannister. The Great Council. How the realm sat down. The Great Council of 299. AC was the first formal gathering of all the great houses since the council that had preceded the Dance of the Dragons 200 years earlier, and it was, by every account, the loudest event in King's Landing since Robert's coronation feast. Every great house sent representatives. The Tyrells sent Olenna and Mace. The Martells sent Doran himself, carried in his chair, his gout visible and his mind sharp. The Baratheons sent Stannis, who came from Dragonstone with the air of a man who had been waiting for exactly this kind of institutional recognition. The Arryns sent Lord Jon Royce, because Lysa was in the Eyrie refusing to come south, and someone had to represent the Vale. The Tullys sent Edmure, who was young and earnest and slightly overwhelmed. The Greyjoys sent Balon, who sent a letter saying the Iron Islands would attend when the Iron Islands had a reason to. The council met in the Great Hall of the Red Keep, with Robert on the throne and Ned beside him, and Tywin in a chair that was not beside the throne but was close enough to matter. The agenda was Ned's. Ned had drafted it with the northern thoroughness that was his signature, clear, organized, comprehensive, covering every issue that the great houses had raised in the months since the Stark-Lannister alliance had formed. The debate was Tywin's. Not because Tywin wanted to control it, because Tywin could not stop himself from managing every conversation he was in, the way a sword could not stop itself from being sharp. He guided the discussion, redirected the arguments, channeled the inevitable conflicts into productive channels. Ned watched Tywin work the room and felt the grudging admiration that had been growing for months. Tywin was brilliant at this. Not good. Brilliant. The man could read a room of 30 lords with competing interests and find the overlap, the place where everyone's desires intersected, the common ground that was narrow enough to be uncomfortable and broad enough to hold. Ned provided something different. Ned provided trust. The lords trusted Ned because Ned was honest, and the trust let them speak plainly, and the speaking plainly let the real issues emerge instead of the performed issues that courtiers usually brought to formal settings. Together, and the word together was becoming less painful to use, Ned noticed, they ran a council that produced actual results. The border disputes were resolved. The trade agreements were restructured. The grievances were heard and, where possible, addressed. Dorne received formal acknowledgement of its grievances, not the Mountain's Head, which had already been sent, but a formal statement from the Crown that the atrocities at the sack had been wrong and that the Crown would not repeat them. It was not an apology. Robert's pride would not permit an apology, and Tywin's would have disintegrated. But it was an acknowledgement, and acknowledgement was the first step toward the thing Dorne really wanted, which was to be seen. The Great Council ran for 3 days. At the end of it, the realm had something it had not had before. A forum. Not a parliament. Westeros was not ready for a parliament, and Tywin would have set himself on fire before permitting one. A forum. A place where the great houses could come and speak and be heard, and influence the governance of the realm without resorting to the traditional methods of influence, which were war and marriage and the occasional assassination. "It's messy," Tywin said to Ned after the final session. "It's government. Government should not be messy. Government is always messy. The question is whether the mess produces order or chaos. This produced order. This produced compromise. Compromise is not order. Compromise is the only kind of order that lasts." Tywin looked at the window. "You may be right," he said. It was the closest thing to a concession Ned had ever heard from Tywin Lannister. The closest. The actual closest would come later. Tyrion, the son who saw. Tyrion Lannister watched the Stark-Lannister alliance from the position that Tyrion occupied in every room, the margin, the edge, the place where the overlooked sat and the seeing was clearest. He had come to King's Landing with his father, because Tyrion always came to King's Landing when his father came, not because he was invited, but because Tyrion understood that presence was a form of relevance, and absence was a form of surrender, and Tyrion Lannister did not surrender. He watched his father change. It was subtle. Nobody who did not know Tywin would have noticed, and the number of people who truly knew Tywin was small enough to count on one hand with fingers left over. But Tyrion knew his father the way the abused knew their abuser, with the intimate precision of someone who had spent a lifetime studying the source of their pain. Tywin was less rigid, less certain, less granite, not different. Tywin would never be different. The fundamental architecture of the man was fixed, the legacy obsession, the contempt for weakness, the refusal to show vulnerability. That would not change. But the architecture had developed. Tyrion searched for the word ventilation. The closed system had acquired openings. The openings were small. A concession here, a listening moment there, a conversation about Aaliyah's children that Tyrion heard about secondhand and that produced, according to Kevin, an expression on Tywin's face that Kevin had never seen before. Ned Stark was doing to Tywin what Tywin had spent 60 years preventing anyone from doing, forcing him to account for his methods. Not by threatening, not by outthinking, by standing beside him every day and being honest. And the honesty was so relentless and so consistent that Tywin's usual defenses, the contempt, the dismissal, the reduction of moral questions to strategic ones, were eroded by the sheer volume of it. Ned Stark was a river. Tywin Lannister was a rock. The river would not move the rock, but the river was carving channels. Tyrion found this interesting and hopeful and slightly frightening, because a Tywin who could be changed by a Stark was a Tywin that Tyrion had not been prepared for, and unprepared for Tywins were the most dangerous kind. He met Ned in the library one evening. "Lord Stark." "Lord Tyrion." "You're changing my father." Ned looked up from the ledger he was reading. "I'm not changing anyone. I'm governing. Your father is. Contributing." "He's contributing. That's one word for it. Another word is yielding, which is something he has never done in 62 years of life, and which you have gotten him to do 3 times in as many months." Tyrion sat. "I'm impressed. And suspicious. My father does not yield. My father repositions. When you think he's given ground, he has usually moved to higher ground." "I know." "Do you?" "Because you're very honest, Lord Stark, and honest men sometimes confuse concession with surrender. My father has conceded things. He has not surrendered. The mountain was a concession, a bannerman for Dornish goodwill. The Great Council was a concession, institutional legitimacy for political stability. These are trades. My father makes trades. He does not make gifts." "I know," Ned said again. "I've been working with him for 4 months. I know what he is. And yet you stay." "I stay because the work is good. The realm is better governed. The finances are cleaner. The justice is more consistent. Your father and I produce better outcomes together than either of us would alone. And the producing matters more than the liking." Tyrion looked at the hand. "You've changed too," Tyrion said. "You're less rigid than you were. Less stark, if you'll forgive the word as an adjective." "I haven't changed. You've accepted that sometimes the honorable course and the effective course are not the same thing, and that choosing the effective course over the honorable one is not a betrayal of your principles, but a maturation of them. That's a change, a big one. Ned Stark, 3 months ago, would not have made that choice." Ned held the fire's light. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe is the most unstark word I've ever heard you use." Tyrion poured wine. "Keep going. The realm needs men who can say maybe." Your father never says maybe. My father never says maybe because maybe implies uncertainty, and uncertainty implies vulnerability, and my father would rather die than be vulnerable. Tyrion drank. But he's becoming more uncertain. Around you. In your presence, the granite develops cracks. Not big ones, hairline, but cracks. He looked at Ned. Don't break him, Lord Stark. He's awful, but he's useful. And the realm needs his awful usefulness. I'm not breaking anyone. You're not trying to. That's what makes it effective. The river doesn't try to carve the rock. It just flows. Ned looked at Tyrion Lannister, the small man with the large brain, the father's shame who was the father's truest mirror, the dwarf who saw what giants missed. You're smarter than your father, Ned said. I know, Tyrion said. Don't tell him. He'll have me drowned. He wouldn't. He might. I've always been his greatest disappointment, and disappointment with a conscience is the most dangerous thing in the Lannister family. We tend to destroy the things that disappoint us. He drank. But you're teaching him not to. Slowly, incrementally, by standing next to him and being decent, which is an act of such quiet violence that he can't even identify it as an attack. He raised his cup. To the Alliance. May it continue to be effective, uncomfortable, and moderately humane. Ned raised his own cup. They drank. It was the first time Ned had shared a drink with a Lannister that did not feel like a negotiation. Robert and Ned, the old friendship. Robert came to the hand study one evening with 2 cups and a bottle, and the expression of a man who wanted company that was not political. Drink with me, Robert said. I have reports. Ned, drink with me. Not as the hand, not as the wolf in the wolf-lion thing. Just drink with me, the way we used to, before any of this. Ned set the reports down. They drank. Not the way Robert usually drank. Not the drowning, the escape, the bottle as weapon against consciousness. They drank the way men drank in the Eyrie when they were young, and the world was ahead of them, and the drinking was about being together, rather than about the wine. You're different, Robert said. I've been governing with Tywin Lannister for 8 months. That would change anyone. Robert drank. You're harder, not colder. Just the edges have been sharpened. The edges that used to be round. The edges that let people walk over me. Nobody walked over you, Ned. You just let more people stand next to you than was safe. Now you know which ones to let close and which ones to keep at arm's length. Robert looked at the cup. Tywin taught you that. Tywin taught me that not everyone who smiles is friendly and not everyone who frowns is hostile. I could have learned that from anyone. But you learned it from the worst man in the 7 kingdoms, which makes the lesson stick harder. Robert drank. He's not the worst man. That was Littlefinger. Tywin is the... what? The most dangerous man who's also on the right side. Is he on the right side? He's on your side. And you're on the right side. So yes. Ned looked at his oldest friend. Robert was drinking less these days, Margaery's influence, the new marriage, the sense that the kingdom was finally being governed rather than merely endured. The Robert who sat across from him was not the Robert of the rebellion, that Robert was gone, dissolved by years and wine and the weight of a throne he had never wanted. But this Robert was better than the Robert of the last 15 years, the drowning king, the man who had used the bottle the way Tywin used the granite, as a wall against the things that hurt. Are you happy? Ned said. Happy? Robert tasted the word. I don't know what I am. Less miserable. Margaery is kind. She's political, but she's kind. And kindness is a thing I forgot existed in a marriage. He looked at the cup. Cersei was never kind. Not once. In 15 years. Not a single kind moment. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be here. That's what I need, my friend being here. Not my hand. My friend. Robert set the cup down. You're going home eventually, aren't you? Eventually. When you do, I'll miss you more than the governance. The governance will be fine. I know. It's the missing that won't be. Robert held the cup. We started as boys in the Eyrie. Now we're old men in a castle. The whole world happened between those two things, and the only constant was you. Ned held his own cup. And you, Ned said. They drank. Not to politics or governance or the alliance. To the thing that had come before all of it, and that would outlast all of it. The friendship of two men who had been boys together, and who had, despite everything the world had thrown at them, remained friends. It was the simplest and the truest thing in Ned's life, and he held it the way you held things that could not be replaced. Renly, the third Baratheon. Renly Baratheon made his move in the 8th month of the alliance, and the move was the first thing that nearly broke it. Renly was Robert's youngest brother and the Lord of Storm's End, and the most politically ambitious of the 3 Baratheon brothers, which was saying something because Robert's ambition had won a throne, and Stannis' ambition had made him the most effective military commander in the realm. Renly's ambition was softer than either, the ambition of charm, of alliances built on liking rather than fear or duty. Renly did not challenge the succession. He did something more sophisticated. He challenged the governance. He went to the great houses that were not part of the Stark-Lannister alliance, and he said, in the smooth, reasonable tones that were Renly's gift, the governance is working, but it's working for the wolf and the lion. What about the rest of us? The argument was effective because it was true. The alliance was inclusive now. The Great Council, the representative appointments, the openings that Ned had insisted on. But the core of the power was still Stark and Lannister, and the core was where the decisions were made, and the decisions reflected the core's priorities. Renly proposed an alternative, a council of peers, elected by the great houses, with real authority, not advisory, but executive. A council that could override the Hand's decisions, a council that would transform the governance from a managed alliance into a shared government. It was, Ned reflected when the proposal reached him, a good idea that would produce terrible results. He wants to replace us, Tywin said. He wants to include the realm in governing itself. He wants to replace us with a committee. Committees do not govern. Committees deliberate. Deliberation is the opposite of governance. His proposal isn't entirely wrong. His proposal is entirely wrong in its timing. The realm is 6 months from a succession crisis. The finances are half rebuilt. The institutional structures are new and fragile, and Renly wants to replace the men who built them with a committee of lords who have never governed anything larger than their own pride. Some of those lords have governed their kingdoms effectively for decades. Governing a kingdom and governing the realm are different things. I have governed the Westerlands for 40 years. You have governed the North for 15. Neither of us was prepared for this. Tywin gestured at the desk, the papers, the accumulated work of 8 months. This is harder than either of us expected, and Renly wants to hand it to men who have not done even the preparation we had. Ned looked at the proposal. We can't dismiss it, Ned said. If we dismiss Renly's proposal, we confirm the criticism that the alliance governs for itself and dismisses alternatives. Then we modify it, accept the principle, reject the mechanism. A stronger advisory council instead of an executive one. More voices, but the Hand retains authority. That's what we already have. Then we already have the right answer, and Renly is proposing the wrong question. That's not how politics works, Tywin. Even when you have the right answer, you have to address the question. If people are asking whether the governance is too concentrated, saying our concentrated governance is good, doesn't answer the question. It proves the point. Tywin held the silence. "What do you propose?" he said. "I propose we invite Renly to the council. Give him a role. Not the executive authority he's asking for. An expanded advisory role. Let him be the voice of the houses that feel excluded. It's less than he wants and more than he has, and it puts him inside the tent where we can manage him instead of outside where we can't. You want to give Renly Baratheon, the most ambitious man in the realm after me, a seat at our table. I want to give the realm's legitimate concerns a legitimate forum. If Renly is the vehicle for those concerns, then Renly gets a seat." Tywin looked at Ned. "This is the thing about you," Tywin said. "Every time I think I've understood your approach, you do something that combines honor with strategy in a way I didn't anticipate. It's—" he searched for the word. "Effective. Thank you." It was not a compliment. "I know. That's how I know it's true." Renly was invited. Renly accepted. The council expanded. The governance became messier, slower, more argumentative, and, Ned insisted, and Tywin grudgingly acknowledged, more stable. Because Renly's voice in the room meant Renly's supporters outside the room had less reason to organize against the crown. And less reason to organize was less reason to rebel. And less reason to rebel was the whole point of governance. The alliance adapted. It was less efficient than it had been when it was just Ned and Tywin in a room. It was more durable. And durability, Ned was teaching Tywin, was worth more than efficiency in the long run. The near break. What almost ended it. The alliance nearly ended in the 10th month, over a thing that neither man expected, and that both should have. Jaime Lannister had been stripped of the Kingsguard, as agreed. He had been sent to Casterly Rock, where he lived in the comfortable limbo of a man who was not exactly a prisoner and not exactly free. The stripping had been quiet. Robert had wanted it loud, had wanted the white cloak torn publicly, but Ned had argued for discretion, and Tywin had, for once, agreed with Ned, because the Lannister name did not need another public humiliation. But Jaime did not go quietly. Jaime went to Winterfell. He went without permission, without announcement, riding north with a small retinue and arriving at the gates of Winterfell on a morning when Catelyn was managing the castle and Robb was in the yard, and the Stark household was going about its business as if the most infamous knight in the Seven Kingdoms was not about to ride through the gates. Catelyn received him with the Tully combination of courtesy and suspicion that was her governing mode. Sir Jaime, Lady Stark, the golden hair, the green eyes, the Lannister beauty that had been for 15 years the face of the Queen's brother and the King's shame. I've come to talk to your husband's partner. My husband is in King's Landing. I know. I'm here to talk to his partner's partner. You. Jaime dismounted. I need you to deliver a message to Lord Stark. One that I cannot deliver to my father, because my father will not hear it. And that I cannot deliver to Lord Stark directly, because Lord Stark is in King's Landing, and I am forbidden to go to King's Landing. What message? That Cersei is not well. Jaime's voice changed. Not the charm, not the swagger, the brother's voice, the voice of a man who loved his sister in every wrong way, and some right ones. She's at the rock. She won't eat. She won't see the children. She sits in her chambers, and He stopped. My father sent her away, and didn't look back, and she's falling apart, and nobody in Casterly Rock has the authority to override my father's orders to leave her alone. Catelyn looked at the Kingslayer. She did not like him. She did not trust him. She had every reason to despise him. The man who had pushed Bran from a window was a man Catelyn would have killed with her bare hands if the situation had permitted. But that particular crime had not happened in this telling, and what Catelyn saw instead was a brother afraid for his sister, which was a thing Catelyn understood, because Catelyn was a sister too. "I'll send the message," Catelyn said. The message went to Ned. Ned brought it to Tywin. The conversation was the hardest they had had. "Cersei is your daughter," Ned said. "I am aware. She is unwell. She is at Casterly Rock. She has servants, physicians, comfort. She has none of those things from you." Ned held the silence. "Tywin, you sent your daughter away. You removed her from her position, her marriage, her identity. You did it to save the realm, and you were right to do it. But you did it without what? Without giving her the one thing she needed from you. Not comfort, not rescue, recognition, that you saw what it cost her. I saw. You saw, and you turned away. Because turning away is what you do. It's what you've always done. You assess, you decide, you act, and then you move to the next problem. People are problems to you, Tywin. Even your children. Even Cersei. My children are not problems. Your children are the most important problem you've ever faced, and you have handled them the way you handle everything, with efficiency and without warmth, and the efficiency has produced results, and the absence of warmth has produced Cersei. Tywin's face, the granite, the cracks, the thing underneath that Ned had seen flashes of over 10 months of daily argument, the emotion that was real and pressurized, and that Tywin kept behind the wall, because showing it felt like losing, and Tywin did not lose. "You are asking me to go to Casterly Rock," Tywin said. "I'm asking you to see your daughter. I have seen my daughter. I see her clearly. I see what she has done and what it has cost, and you see her mistakes. I'm asking you to see her." Ned looked at the Lord of Casterly Rock. "You once told me that honor is a tool. You use it when it serves the purpose. Let me tell you something about your tool, legacy. Legacy is not a name or a fortune or a position. Legacy is the people you leave behind, and how they remember you. Cersei will remember you as the father who sent her away. Is that the legacy you want?" Tywin held the silence for a very long time. "I'll go," he said, "after the council session." "Before the council session." "After." "Tywin, before the council session." The granite cracked. 1 inch. "I'll go before the council session." He went. He went to Casterly Rock, and he saw his daughter, and what happened between them was between them and nobody else. Because even the story that tells everything does not tell the private things between a father and a daughter who have both failed each other and who are both, in their own damaged way, trying. He came back to King's Landing 3 days later. He did not tell Ned what had happened. Ned did not ask. Some things were better left in the rooms where they occurred. But Tywin was different after. Not transformed. Tywin would never be transformed. Adjusted. The control was still there, but the pressure behind it was different. As if something that had been compressed for years had been released by a fraction, and the fraction was enough to make the granite hold differently. The alliance held. It held through the near break and the recovery and the years turning and the steady, grinding, relentless work of governing a kingdom that did not want to be governed by 2 men who did not want to govern together. It held because both men had learned, through 10 months of daily argument, the thing that neither had known at the start, that they needed each other. Not wanted, needed. The wolf needed the lion's teeth, and the lion needed the wolf's trust, and neither would admit it, and both knew it, and the knowing was the thing that held. The parting. How equals say goodbye. The parting came at the end of the first year, when the work was done. Not finished, because governance was never finished, but done in the way that a foundation was done. Solid, level, capable of supporting whatever was built on top of it. Littlefinger had been tried and executed. The succession was secure. The finances were rebuilding. The Great Council had met twice and produced, despite everyone's worst fears, actual results. The Tyrells were allied through marriage. The Martells were mollified through justice. The Vale was participating through representation. Stannis was positioned as heir through law. The realm was stable. Not happy. Stability and happiness were different things, and anyone who confused them was going to be disappointed. But stable, held together by institutions and agreements, and the careful, methodical work of two men who had argued their way to an arrangement that nobody loved and everybody could live with. Tywin came to the Hand's study on a morning in late autumn, when the leaves were falling in the godswood and the court was settling into the rhythms that would carry it through winter. "I'm going home," Tywin said. Ned looked up from the report he was reading. The Crown's quarterly revenue summary, a document that Jon Arryn had never been able to get Robert to read, and that Ned read every morning because the reading was the job. "When?" Ned said. "Tomorrow. The work here is sufficient. The government functions. The council meets. The appointments are made. You don't need me. I've never needed you. You have always needed me. You just didn't enjoy it." Ned set the report down. He looked at Tywin Lannister, the tall, thin man with the green-gold eyes and the mouth that had been designed for disapproval. The man he had spent a year arguing with. The man he had compromised with, fought with, negotiated against, governed alongside. The man who had sent the Mountain to Dawn and handled Cersei's secret and drafted council proposals and argued about harbour tariffs and timber exports and every other detail of governance that a kingdom required. The man who had, somewhere in the course of the year, become the closest thing Ned had to an equal. Not a friend. The word was wrong. The distance between Ned Stark and Tywin Lannister was not a distance that friendship could cross. The values were too different, the methods too opposed. The fundamental disagreement about how power should be exercised too deep and too honest. They would never like each other. They would never choose to spend time together. They would never sit by a fire and share stories and feel the ease that friendship required. But they respected each other, and the respect was harder to earn than friendship, and more durable, and, in its own austere way, more valuable. "You've been useful," Ned said. "Useful." Tywin's mouth did the thing it did. "High praise, Lord Stark. It's the highest I've got." "I know. Northerners." They stood in the Hand's study, the room where they had met 14 months ago, when Robert had put them in the same room and told them to sort it out. The room where they had argued about everything and agreed on enough and built a government that was better than either of them would have built alone. "You've been useful too," Tywin said. It came out reluctantly, the way Tywin's compliments always came out, pressurized, forced through a gap in the granite that was not wide enough for the words. "I know," Ned said. "The government works because you brought something I don't have. Honor, trust. You brought trust. The Lords trust you because you're honest, and the trust lets them cooperate, and the cooperation makes the government function. I could never have produced that. I produce fear and compliance, which are useful, but which are not the same as trust. Trust is," he searched. "Trust is a better foundation." Ned looked at the Lord of Casterly Rock. "That is the most un-Tywin thing you have ever said," Ned said. "Don't get used to it. I'm going back to the north. I won't have the chance." "Good. My reputation requires that no more than one person per decade hear me acknowledge a strength I don't possess." They stood in the room. The leaving was the hard part. Not because they didn't want to go. Both of them wanted to go. Tywin wanted Casterly Rock, and Ned wanted Winterfell, and both of them wanted to be home, in the places where they were entirely themselves, where the compromise and the daily argument and the grinding discomfort of governing with a man you didn't like were replaced by the clean simplicity of ruling alone. But the leaving meant the ending. And the ending meant acknowledging that the thing they had built together was not a thing that would exist without both of them. And the acknowledging was a form of vulnerability that neither man was comfortable with. "Lord Lannister," Ned said. "Lord Stark." Ned extended his hand. Tywin looked at it. The hand of the Warden of the North. The hand that had signed the orders and held the quill and hammered the desk during arguments that ran for hours. The hand of the most infuriating man Tywin Lannister had ever worked with, and the most effective. Tywin took it. The handshake was brief. It was firm. It communicated everything that the two men would never say to each other out loud, that the year had changed them both, that the changing was irreversible, that neither man was the same as the man who had walked into this room 14 months ago. "If the realm needs us again," Ned said. "It won't," Tywin said. "If it does." Tywin held the handshake for 1 second longer than necessary. "If it does," Tywin said, "I'll come." He let go. He walked to the door. "Lord Stark," Tywin said at the door. "Yes. You were right about the Great Council, about consent, about—" He stopped. "About the things I was wrong about." "You were right about some things too." "I was right about most things. There it is." "There what is?" "The Tywin I know. I was worried for a moment that you'd become a decent person." Tywin's mouth did the thing it did. Not a smile, never a smile, but the closest thing to a smile that Tywin Lannister had ever produced in the presence of a man who was not family. "Goodbye, Lord Stark." "Goodbye, Lord Lannister." Tywin left. Ned sat in the hand's study. The room was quiet now, the kind of quiet that came after a year of daily argument, the silence that was not empty, but resting. He picked up the revenue report. He went back to work. What if Ned Stark and Tywin Lannister allied? They allied because a king forced them to, and they stayed because the realm needed them to, and they succeeded because neither man could have done alone what they did together. The wolf brought trust and the lion brought teeth, and the combination produced the most effective and the most miserable political partnership in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. They never became friends. They argued every day about taxes and appointments and justice and tariffs and the 1,000 small decisions that held a kingdom together. They argued because they disagreed about everything: honor and expedience, trust and fear, consent and control, the things that a government owed its people and the things that a government owed itself. They argued because the arguing was the mechanism. The arguing was how two men with opposite philosophies found the narrow ground between them where both philosophies applied, and the narrow ground was where the good decisions lived. Ned learned that honor without strategy was a weapon pointed at yourself. Tywin learned that fear without trust was a foundation built on sand. Neither man abandoned his philosophy. Neither man became the other. They became adjusted, ventilated. The closed systems acquired openings, and the openings let in air that neither system had known it needed. The realm was better for it. Not happy. The realm was never happy. Happiness was for places smaller than kingdoms, but governed, held together by institutions that had been built by two men who did not like each other and who had, through the sheer grinding pressure of daily collaboration, learned the one thing that mattered: that the realm needed both of them, and that being needed by the same thing was its own form of bond. They parted as equals, not friends. The word was wrong and would always be wrong. Equals. Men who had seen each other's strengths and weaknesses and who had been changed by the seeing, not transformed. never transformed, but adjusted, the way metal was adjusted by the forge. Heated, shaped, cooled. Still metal, but different metal. Ned Stark went home to the north. He rode the King's Road with 20 Northmen and the accumulated weight of 14 months of governing. And the weight was different from the weight he had carried south, lighter in some places, heavier in others, changed by the carrying. He wrote to Catelyn from the inn at the crossroads, halfway between the two worlds he had inhabited. "You were right," he wrote, "about hunting with the lion, about knowing where its teeth are. I have spent 14 months next to those teeth, and I have learned more about governing than 15 years of Winterfell taught me. I have also learned more about compromise than I ever wanted to know, and I have discovered that compromise does not destroy honor. It tests it. The honor that survives compromise is stronger than the honor that avoids it." He stopped writing. He looked at the inn's fire. He thought about the things he would not write to Catelyn. The late nights. The arguments. The moment when Tywin had said she was 3 about Rhaenys, and the granite had cracked, and Ned had seen the thing underneath. The things that belonged to the alliance, and not to the letter. He wrote one more line. "I am coming home a different man. Not a changed one. Do not worry. A man who has seen the thing that honor and pragmatism can build when they are forced together. It is not a beautiful thing, but it is a strong thing. And strength, I am learning, matters more than beauty in the building of a world." He sealed the letter. He sent it. He rode north. Winterfell was waiting. The Godswood was waiting. The cold was waiting. The clean, honest, uncompromised cold that was the North's gift to everyone who lived there. The cold that stripped the performance from a man and left him with nothing but himself. Ned wanted to be himself again, fully, completely, without the daily compromise that governing with Tywin required. He wanted to sit in the Godswood and feel the old gods and hear nothing but the wind and the distant sound of his children in the yard. But he knew, riding north through the autumn rain, that the self he was returning to was not the self he had left. The year had changed him. Not dramatically. Ned Stark would always be Ned Stark, the quiet northern lord who ruled by honor and who believed that a man's word was the foundation of everything else. But the foundation had been expanded. It now included things that a younger Ned would not have accepted: the utility of compromise, the value of working with men you disagreed with, the possibility that the world's problems required not purity, but partnership. He would never say this to Tywin. Tywin would weaponize the acknowledgement. But he knew it, and the knowing was enough. He governed Winterfell with the quiet honor that had always been his, but with something new underneath, a strategic awareness that had not been there before. The gift of a year spent arguing with the most ruthless man in Westeros. Tywin Lannister went home to Casterly Rock. He governed the Westerlands with the golden efficiency that had always been his, but with something new underneath, a conscience, small and carefully contained, that had not been there before, the gift of a year spent arguing with the most honorable man in Westeros. They wrote to each other. Not often, not warmly, but the letters came. A note about a trade agreement, a question about a legal precedent, the correspondence of two men who had learned to value each other's judgment, even when they disagreed with it. The realm held. It held because the foundation they had built was good. Not perfect. No foundation was perfect, and the cracks that would eventually appear were already visible to men who knew where to look. But good. Solid. The kind of foundation that held through winters and wars and the inevitable stupidity of the men who would come after. Ned Stark and Tywin Lannister. The wolf and the lion. The honor and the teeth. They saved the realm. They hated every minute of it. It was the finest thing either of them ever did.